Chapter 1090. The National Master looked at the sky because he knew someone would jump down from the sky soon. The powerhouses of the Academy would not care about the Duoer cavalry who were attacking from the south because there were too many of them. Except for Jun Mo before he lost his arm, no one could stop them. One man holding the pass against tens of thousands of cavalry. This had not happened many times in history. It had nothing to do with cultivation state and strength. It was related to an indescribable aura. Even if Yu Lian and Tang appeared in the south of the city of Wei, they would not be able to do it. Or in other words, both of them would not do it. In this case, the Academy would not care about the Duoer cavalry. On the contrary, the Academy would take the chance to kill the National Master and dozens of high priests when the royal court was desperate. As for Ada and General Buell, they would definitely be the targets of the Academy, and this would be the perfect opportunity for the royal court. On a dangerous battlefield, in front of a hopeless abyss, everything that seemed like an opportunity could actually be a trap. No one could completely figure out the hidden information, unless Haotian returned to the human world. In that case, the two sides would only be competing on determination, willpower, speed, and luck. He was very clear that if the Duoer cavalry could defeat the northern battlefront army where Su Chi was before the Academy succeeded, then the battle around the city of Wei would come to a conclusion. Even if the powerhouses of the Academy came together and defeated the powerhouses of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, they would not be able to achieve their original goal. The extermination of the Duoer cavalry would become a joke. That was the goal of Chanyu and the National Master. No matter how he looked at it, the Golden Tribe Royal Court had a chance to escape this morning. The National Master thought silently. At this moment, the darkness finally could not stand the torture of time. It gradually thinned and a faint light shone from behind. Although the sun had not risen from the grassland, it was already morning. The morning light shone on the National Master's old face. It was like a clear stream flowing into a cracked field. After a moment of nourishment, it was sucked dry and could no longer be seen. The crack in the field seemed to be unfathomable. It was said that the 23-year cicada Yu Lian and the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill were the two most mysterious people in the cultivation world. In fact, the Nation Master was just as mysterious. No one knew how old he was, or who his master was. But it was obvious that he was not good at the methods that the grassland barbarian priests were best at. His cultivation seemed to be a combination of the ideas of many sects, but it did not belong to any sect of Buddhism or Diabolism. It was hard to describe. In fact, even the Nation Master himself sometimes did not understand what kind of Dharma he had been cultivating throughout his long life. Because he grew up with the High Priest of the Grassland. He was not the High Priest of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, but the High Priest of the Right Royal Court. Therefore, he had been learning Buddhism from the very beginning. When he came to the Golden Tribe Royal Court, he met Xiong Chumo who was severely injured by Yu Lian, or Lin Wu, the Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine at that time. He saved Xiong Chumo's life. To show his gratitude, Xiong Chumo taught him the secret divine skills of the divine halls of West Hill. He even traveled to Chang'an. Buddhism, Taoism, and witchcraft were all his cultivation. In terms of knowledge, he could definitely be ranked among the top 5 in the world. He had mastered 3 paths, so his state was naturally unfathomable. However, he still wanted to figure out what he wanted to cultivate in the end. Especially after taking the former Chanyu as his disciple and becoming the National Master of the Golden Tribe, this desire grew stronger. He knew where this desire came from. It was the sense of belonging, or root, that everyone wanted to find. It was not until many years ago that he felt the great will of Haotian. He felt that his body and soul had been washed by snow water and became abnormally clean. He finally understood that it was not important what kind of Dharma he practiced. His sense of belonging had nothing to do with his sect or sect. It was only related to his faith. As long as the faith was right, so what if he cultivated evil? As long as the goal was right, so what if he practiced evil? Perhaps it was because he understood this that his state became more and more unfathomable. No one knew how far he had gone. During the right to light in the Peach Mountain, he did not really fight. That was because Ning Ke used Haotian to control the world. He was too powerful, and he did not want the world to know. Because of his faith, he had to defeat the academy. Even though he had a high state, he still had to spend a lot of effort and preparation to defeat those unimaginable people in the academy. When Yu Lian disappeared from the eastern wilderness, he knew that the day was coming. He had prepared calmly for 3 years. Those carriages that were quietly parked by the mud walls of the city of Wei had also been waiting for 3 years. Even if it did not work, he had a way to trap those too. In this story of the city of Wei, apart from the waiting and forbearance of the national master and the powerhouses of the grassland and the academy, there was another important thing, whether the duo or cavalry could break through the central military camp of the Tang army. In the morning light, it was quiet inside and outside the city. It seemed that everyone was sleeping, but in fact, no one was sleeping. Countless pairs of eyes were staring at the city gate with vigilance. With a very low squeak, the city gate of the city of Wei slowly opened from the inside. Many tiny dust particles came out from the gap of the double plywood door and sprinkled like pearls in the morning light. A sharp warning suddenly pierced the silent sky and spread in all directions. The Tang army's camp in the south of the city suddenly came to life. The Tang army, who had been prepared for a long time, carried all kinds of military equipment and were busy preparing. The final battle between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe Royal Court had begun as usual. The city gate slowly opened and a grassland cavalryman slowly walked out. Both the cavalryman and the warhorse were covered in tough leather armor. Only their eyes were exposed, and they were indifferent and proud. The grassland cavalryman held a long machete in his hand and wore a white cloak around his neck. The cloak fluttered in the morning wind, looking like white clouds in the blue sky. Because their cloaks were like white clouds, they were called the Duoer cavalry. The Duoer cavalry was the source of their pride. They were the strongest and most loyal cavalrymen of the Golden Palace Chanyu, and the most terrifying existence on the grassland. In the past hundreds of years, even the richest Golden Palace could only support 6,000 Duoer cavalry at most. It was these 6,000 Duoer cavalry that were the biggest deterrent to the Tang cavalry. With the official rise of the Golden Palace, especially with the continuous secret support from the Central Plains under the leadership of Taoism, Chanyu now had a total of 36,000 Duoer cavalry. In the cavalry battle outside Guha, it was the Duoer cavalry who joined the battle at the end. They sacrificed all their men to stabilize the situation and prevent the Golden Palace from collapsing. For this, the bodies of 6,000 cavalrymen were still rotting on the grassland in the spring wind. After retreating north to the 7 stockade villages, Chanyu ordered 20,000 Duoer cavalry to reinforce Kaiping and Chu City to attract the main force of the Tang cavalry. He only left the most elite and powerful 10,000 cavalrymen in the city of Wei. 10,000 cavalrymen was not a small number. As far as the eye could see, it must be a dark mass that could cover a large area of the grassland. But now the Tang army could not see 10,000 cavalrymen, only one. They could only see the grassland cavalryman at the gate of the city of Wei, his cloak flying in the morning wind. The grassland cavalryman lifted the reins with his left hand and lightly hit the warhorse's belly with his boot heel. The warhorse slowly moved forward. Tap, 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 tap. The hoofbeats were slow and clear. The grassland cavalryman kicked the horse's belly again. The warhorse slowly sped up. Tap, 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 tap. At this time, they were already 20 feet away from the gate. The grassland cavalryman kicked the horse's belly again. The warhorse sped up again. Tap, 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 tap. One horse charged towards the Tang camp. A lone rider charging into the camp. The grassland cavalryman knew he would die, but he did not care. Inside the gate of the city of Wei, a black wall vaguely appeared. The black wall was moving forward. Another white wall appeared. The black wall was the cavalryman and the warhorse. The white wall was the white cloak worn by the cavalryman. It was the duo or cavalry in a row. Black and white mixed together to form waves, snow-born in the sea of ink. Countless duo or cavalry were ready to charge with the brave cavalrymen. In the city of Wei, the hoofbeats had yet to be heard, but they were about to be heard. If it was thunder, it must be muffled thunder. If it was a drum, it must be a huge drum. The grassland cavalryman who first left the city had already arrived at the meadow. The indifference in his eyes, which was not covered by his leather armor, had been replaced by fanaticism and brutality. He raised the bloodthirsty machete in his hand and was ready to really speed up. The next moment, 10,000 grassland cavalrymen would follow him and charge towards the Tang camp. At that time, 10,000 white clouds would bloom on the grassland. The hoofbeats grew louder and louder. Who could stop them? Su Qi, the Tang's defender general of the state, was in the central military tent. There were 6,000 cavalrymen and 10,000 well-trained infantrymen. Logically speaking, there should not be much to worry about. But the commander's tent had chased them through the night, and there were many supplies that had not arrived yet. Most importantly, there were many engineers and civilian workers who were still on the way. It was very difficult for the hastily laid fortifications to be as sturdy as before. At this moment, if the duo or cavalry, who were feared by the horse gang on the grassland, charged over, everyone in the central military tent would be in big trouble. When the gate of Wei opened and the grassland cavalrymen appeared, everyone in the central military tent looked at Su Qi. They were not panicking, but rather anxious. They were not panicking because Su Qi was the best military genius in the world. Otherwise, how could he use the northern battlefront army to block the Golden Tribe royal court outside the 7 stockade villages for more than 10 years? But they were still anxious because the Golden Tribe royal court was obviously going all out today. If they were not careful and let the duo or cavalry gain the upper hand, it would be terrible. The only cavalry that the Tang army could win against the duo or cavalry was the black armored cavalry. But most of them were in the south to defend against the papal cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill. Thousands of black armored cavalry from the northern military camp had been sent to Kaiping by Su Qi 2 days ago to help Situilan clear the grassland forces there. How could they stop the duo or cavalry? The grassland cavalryman was speeding up, and the hoofbeats became coherent. The cavalrymen at the gate of Wei, like a black sea in white waves, had not started charging. They were waiting to do so. The grassland cavalryman and his horse drew a straight line on the field under the morning light. It was a line written with courage and courage. The tens of thousands of duo or cavalry behind him would follow the line he drew with his life. They would charge fiercely and fearlessly. That was the rhythm the Golden Tribe royal court wanted. It was the rhythm of a bloody battle to the end, a rhythm of blood flowing like a river. It would start as gentle as a drizzle, and then as terrifying as a storm. It was continuous and unstoppable. If the grassland cavalrymen entered that rhythm, the Tang army would be in danger. By then, it would be meaningless even if they killed the first duo or cavalry. But now it seemed that there was no better way to break the rhythm. The city of Wei was far away from the Tang army. Even the best archer could not kill the grassland cavalrymen in advance. As for the most powerful defensive weapon of the Tang army, the crossbow battalion based on arrays, their shooting range was far from enough. So they could only prepare for the frontal charge of the tens of thousands of duo or cavalry. People looked at Su Qi, waiting for his orders. The most important thing to do now was to move the crossbow battalions from the east and west sides to the center of the army. Once the crossbow battalions were moved, the grassland cavalrymen might attack from both sides of the city wall. But the most important thing now was to guard the center. Su Qi did nothing. He just looked at the dusty city in the north under the morning light, and listened to the louder and louder hoofbeats without any expression on his face. General. Marshal. People in the tent looked at him anxiously. They did not understand why he was so silent. Did the general have a brilliant plan? Or was the general worried about the two flanks and decided to defend to the death? Su Chi ignored his subordinates' puzzled, anxious, and even slightly angry gazes. He just quietly looked at the plains in the north, at the Duo cavalry that was getting closer and closer. The hoofbeats were monotonous as they charged into the camp alone. It was quiet between heaven and earth. The field between the city of Wei and the Tang camp seemed to have lost all color. The green grass turned gray and the morning light dimmed, forming a very flat and dark background screen. The brave grassland cavalryman was the only existence in it. The grassland cavalryman was already more than 100 feet away from the city of Wei. The monotonous hoofbeats became clearer and clearer, like drumbeats beating on the field. The gray grass fell to the ground and the morning light became distorted. The whole world seemed to be shaking. After a while, 10,000 of the most elite grassland cavalrymen would charge out of the city. At that time, the drumbeats would shake heaven and earth and the world would be restless. Who could stop all this? Who could break the rhythm of the Duo cavalry? The city of Wei was silent. Heaven and earth were silent. Suddenly the wind blew. The grassland cavalryman fell down. The grassland cavalryman who was charging alone, bravely, resolutely, and silently fell down in the beautiful morning light. A very thin stream of blood splashed in the air. It was abnormally clear under the morning light. The world regained its original color. The dim and cold light became warm again. Death was coming, but it warmed up. Or maybe it was because they finally saw hot blood. The grassland cavalryman fell down from the horse and his body fell heavily on the field. The saddle of the Duo cavalry was specially made. It did not tie the horse's feet. The horse continued to charge forward for more than 100 feet before it felt something strange and slowly stopped. It looked back at its master who fell on the field and slightly raised its head. It was a little confused and did not know what had happened. The cavalryman lay on the field in front of the city gate. He did not move, did not struggle, and did not cry out in pain. Because he was no longer breathing. He didn't make any sound, and he didn't leave any last words that were as magnificent as mountains and rivers. He knew he was going to die, but he did not expect that he would die so quietly and so insignificant. The Duo cavalry and the horse were covered with tough leather armor. Only their eyes were exposed. He opened his eyes and looked at the sky which was getting bluer. His vitality had disappeared and only blood was flowing. There was a wooden arrow stuck in his eye. It was a very ordinary wooden arrow. No one knew where the arrow came from. In the quiet field, there was the morning light, the wind, the grass, but no one. I still think I wrote it well. Chapter 1091. In front of the city of Wei, there was a lonely horse and a lonely corpse in the field. Just like the confused warhorse, the people in the city of Wei and the Tang camp did not know what happened. Where did the arrow come from? There was a deathly silence in the wilderness. It was absolute silence. Everyone was stunned. After some time, the hoofbeats sounded again. Another grassland cavalryman set off from the city gate and slowly rode towards the Tang camp in the south. Everyone stared at this cavalryman, knowing that he would die in the next moment. The commander of the Duo cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court obviously wanted this cavalryman to die so that he could find out where the arrow came from. There was a soft hum, and there was a slight breeze in the morning light. The cavalryman's cloak fluttered in the wind and dissipated before he could turn into a cloud. Just like his life. Another ordinary arrow pierced deeply into his eye socket, causing a spray of blood to spurt out. When this cavalryman was shot to death, he was only a few dozen feet away from the city of Wei. The hoofbeats sounded again and several grassland cavalrymen rushed out of the city of Wei. The cavalrymen kept waving their leather whips, leaving bloody marks on the warhorse's buttocks. Their shouts broke the silence in front of the city gate. They were unafraid of death. At this speed, even the best warhorse could not last long. It was not enough to support these cavalrymen from the city of Wei to the Tang camp in the south. But obviously, they did not care. This time, the grassland people did not care about the rhythm, nor did they care about using time and speed to accumulate momentum. From the beginning, they rode at the fastest speed. They just wanted to rush out of the city gate. They could not let the arrow that came from nowhere destroy the momentum of the duo cavalry. They could not let the arrow break the rhythm of the duo cavalry. They had to prove something. Even if they would be shot to death soon after they got out of the city gate, it would at least prove that the mysterious and powerful archer could not do anything more unimaginable and could not stop all the cavalrymen. But what happened next was really unimaginable. The morning breeze blew gently, and the white cloaks spread out like clouds. There were 3 soft swishing sounds, and then the clouds suddenly disappeared, and blood suddenly appeared. The 3 grassland cavalrymen still didn't even make a sound before they fell from their horses to the ground. Their eye sockets were pierced by arrows, and the liquid in their eyeballs mixed with blood flowed down. The 3 arrows were still the standard arrows most commonly used by the Tang army. What was even more shocking and frightening was that when these 3 duo cavalry were killed, they were closer to the gates than the second duo cavalry. More accurately, when they charged out of the gates, they were killed by the arrows. That arrow, where did it come from? Still, no one could see where the arrow came from. Because the arrow was too fast. How could an ordinary arrow be shot so far? How could he shoot so fast? Speed and distance depended on the bow and the archer's strength, but what about accuracy? The duo cavalry was fully armored, with only their eyes exposed. Moreover, they were galloping at high speeds, which made it even harder to hit them. Yet, that person was able to hit them from such a distance. Who on earth was that archer? From the north to the south of the grassland, the Golden Palace, the Northern Battlefront Army, and the horse gang by the Shubi Lake, there were countless geniuses who were good at riding and shooting. Yet, none of them could do it. The entire city of Wei fell into absolute silence again. Some people had vaguely guessed where the arrow came from. Not where it came from, but who it came from. For example, the nation master, Lebu, Enida. To be able to kill elite cavalrymen with wooden arrows over such a long distance, he must have unimaginable strength. He must be one of the most powerful cultivators in the world. When people talked about a truly powerful archer, they would usually think of General Xiahou. After Xiahou was killed, there was only one person left, and that was the one who killed Xiahou. Not everyone could not see where the arrow came from. At least, the Tang soldiers around the place where the arrow came from could see it clearly. In an inconspicuous fort in the far north of the Tang camp, there was a fence that was built last night. There was someone standing behind the fence, and something that looked like a short fence. A dozen Tang soldiers looked at that person, too shocked to speak. They did not know what to do at this moment. Only then did someone wake up and hurry to report to his superior. That person was wearing an ordinary Tang uniform, just like any other Tang soldier. He held an unusual iron bow in his hand. The body of the bow was dark, with complicated talisman lines engraved on it. The iron bow seemed to have some kind of magic power. The short fence next to the person was not a real fence, but a dense array of arrows. At least 1,000 arrows were stuck tightly in the soil, squeezed together, and looked like a fence. Hoofbeats sounded again in the city of Wei. No one knew how many duo cavalry were trying to rush out of the city gate. That person took out an arrow from the forest of arrows beside him, placed it on the string, and pulled the bow in silence. When the iron bow was half drawn, he loosened his fingers, and the string returned to its original position. With a swoosh, the arrow flew away. A muffled groan came from the city of Wei in the distance, followed by the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. At this moment, that person had already taken out a second arrow from the ground, and repeated the previous action. Another muffled groan and the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground came from the city of Wei's gate. Another cavalry was shot down. All the trained Tang soldiers knew that shooting an arrow was actually a breakdown of several actions, starting from the pulling of the arrow and ending with the release of the string. The people watching from the side in shock did not think that there was anything special about that person's action. It was even simpler and more mechanical than the archery actions commonly seen in the Tang camp. Because it was simple and mechanical, it was not tall and straight, not to mention elegant. But that person's arrow was fast, so fast that it was beyond the scope of human imagination. In the direction of the city of Wei, the Duoer cavalry's charge was no longer as slow as before. But that person did not act like in some legends. From the first arrow to the sixth arrow, the surrounding Tang soldiers did not blink. It was not because they were too shocked to blink, but because they did not have time to blink. In the blink of an eye, 6 arrows pierced through the air. Logically speaking, these Tang soldiers should not have been able to see the archer's movements. But they could, because the archer's movements were so accurate and steady that it was hard to imagine. There was no change in the repetitive movements. His fingers were always in the same position on the bowstring. Even the sleeves on his forearms did not tremble. The 6 repeated actions were the overlapping shadows in the morning wind. When combined together, it could be seen clearly. But there were shadows. More arrows left the ground, were placed on the bowstrings, and pierced through the air. The grassland cavalry that rushed out of the city fell to the ground, and then smashed into the ground, creating small blossoms of blood. The cavalry did not stop charging, and the arrows did not stop shooting, not stopping at all. In the end, the cavalry charged out of the city gate so fast that even that person could not aim. So he stopped aiming, and just shot with his elbows and wrists. The sharp arrows crossed a long distance and came to the front of the city of Wei. They fell on the grassland cavalry, the warhorses, and the tough leather armor. But they broke through the armor. The moment the arrows touched the surface of the leather armor, they had completed their mission. The shafts were twisted into pieces by the huge force, but they still pushed the sharp arrowheads to their final destination. That was deep inside the flesh of the cavalry or their mounts. Looking at the figure of that person behind the fence, the Tang soldiers' eyes became more and more respectful. Everything that happened was so unbelievable. How terrifying the power of those arrows were. What was that person's body made of? How could he shoot so many powerful arrows in a row? Even the martial arts masters in the army had to rest after shooting dozens of arrows. Otherwise, their muscles would definitely be seriously injured. But that man had already shot more than 100 arrows, but his expression did not change. His body was as still as a mountain. Not to mention that his breathing had become rapid, even his chest did not seem to rise or fall. Suddenly, urgent bugles sounded around the Tang camp. Hundreds of Duoer cavalry went around the city wall, and tried to occupy the higher ground of the meadow, and then charged towards the Tang camp. But that person ignored them, and only stared at the city gate. The Duoer cavalry that was hiding in the city finally grasped the rhythm of the arrows. They found an opportunity, and opened the city gate completely. Then, dozens of cavalry that were the best at riding rushed out at the same time. Dozens of Duoer cavalry rushed out of the city gate, like countless clouds of fog rushing out of the gate between two mountains. At this moment, no matter how amazing that person's archery was, he could not kill dozens of cavalry at the same time, not to mention that there were hundreds or even thousands of cavalry behind him waiting to continue the charge. The Tang camp's shouts became more and more urgent, and 6,000 cavalry mounted their horses, ready to counterattack. If the mysterious and terrifying arrows could not protect the front of the central military camp, then they could only rely on the cavalry themselves. But that person did not give the Tang cavalry a chance to fight. He continued shooting arrows in silence. Facing the grassland cavalry that rushed out of the city gate like a cloud of fog, he shot an arrow. He only shot one arrow. Unlike before, This arrow was not pulled out from the grass beside him, but from the quiver on his back. That arrow was obviously different. The arrowhead was a round cylinder. A shrill whistle sounded in the morning sky. Under everyone's gaze, the arrow flew in an arc, and landed in front of the city of Wei. There was a moment of silence. Then, boom! A loud bang sounded in front of the city of Wei, raising a lot of soil, as if it was going to tear open the sky. Among the flying soil, there were the broken limbs of horses and cavalrymen, and even some heads flying in the air. The city of Wei's gate collapsed, the soil and bricks in the soil rustled down, crushing countless injured Duoer cavalry. Muffled groans and cries of pain could be faintly heard in the dust. Another arrow came from the south. This time, the sound of the arrow was clearer than before, not like a breeze, but like a hurricane, whistling mournfully. The whistling of the arrow sounded continuously. Hundreds of arrows, as if there was no break, passed through the morning wind, passed through the dust, and shot into the depths. A grassland cavalry jumped off his dead horse, pulled out his scimitar, and looked around anxiously, but did not know where the enemy was. Suddenly, an arrow came from the south, and pierced through his chest. A grassland cavalryman crawled up with blood all over his body and walked out of the smoke and dust. He kept shouting something, appearing particularly ruthless. Suddenly, an arrow was shot into his mouth and came out from the back of his head, bringing with it a flower of blood. A grassland cavalry fell to the ground, waved his scimitar, and killed his horse, which was still kicking after being shot. He struggled to stand up, eyes full of fear, and then he saw an arrow flying towards his fear. Puff, 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 puff. The arrow hit the leather armor, the eyes, the throat, and other different places, but made a very similar sound, which was the sound of something piercing. Those arrows seemed to have magic power, and could pierce through everything. In the dust in front of the city of Wei, there were deaths everywhere. The sound of arrows and muffled groans, which represented death, rang incessantly. After an unknown period of time, the dust finally settled, and the morning sun fell again, falling in front of the city of Wei, plated with a layer of red light. The morning sun finally peeked out of the grassland, red as if it was stained with blood. The morning sun was like blood, and the front of the city was covered in blood. At this time, the people inside and outside the city had already confirmed where the arrows came from. Everyone looked at the Tang camp, at the fence. Until now, not a single grassland cavalry could rush to the Tang camp. In fact, except for the first 3 cavalrymen, no one could rush out of the city of Wei. It was a mess in front of the city of Wei, with the corpses of the cavalrymen and warhorses piled up into a small hill. Fresh blood flowed down from the small mountain like countless tiny waterfalls. Back then, in front of the verdant canyon, Jun Mo blocked with his sword, and no one could pass. After Jun Mo lost his arm, no one thought that such a scene would appear again. Who would have thought that the scene in the city of Wei would appear again today, but in reverse? Today, with one arrow in the south, no one could come out. That person, with an iron bow and a ground full of arrows, had sealed the Golden Tribe Royal Court's most powerful cavalry in the city of Wei. At the same time the explosion occurred at the city gates, the hundreds of Duo-er cavalry that were charging towards the Tang camp from both sides also suffered a crushing blow. The crossbow battalion that had been hiding at the side all this while, released their long-prepared rage and concentrated crossbow arrows at the same time. There was a buzzing sound on the grassland. It was the sound of zither, as if countless zither were playing the same tune. After a while, when the sound disappeared, tens of thousands of crossbow arrows fell at the same time, like a rainstorm. The royal court had designed the route of their charge to pass through the city, because this was the shortest distance and the shortest time. However, no one expected that this route would be so dangerous. The attack from the 2 sides needed to go around the city, so it was not direct enough to break through Su Chi's rain of crossbow arrows. Therefore, the real turning point of the battle was still the middle route, and it depended on whether the Duo-er cavalry could rush out of the city gate. Only by rushing out of the city gate could there be a possibility of continuing the charge, and all the subsequent plans could be carried out. If they could not even rush out of the city gate, how could they talk about anything else? Behind the mountain of corpses that was dripping with blood at the city gate, the angry and violent curses of the nobles of the royal court could be vaguely heard, along with the merciless orders and hurried footsteps. No one knew how many people were rushing over, hoping to clear the mountain of corpses from the city gate in the shortest time possible, so as to make way for the cavalry behind. As for whether the iron hooks and ropes would hurt the bodies of the tribal warriors in the process, it was no longer within the grassland people's consideration. The desire to live had overwhelmed everything else. However, for the last warriors of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, today was destined to be a day of despair. The Tangs did not give them any chance, not even a chance to move the bodies of their compatriots. Inside and outside the city of Wei, there was suddenly a brief moment of silence. The sky that was dyed red by the rising sun suddenly revealed its original azure color. The wild flowers that were gently swayed by the wind on the field suddenly stopped moving, and the air that wrapped the fragile petals suddenly became countless times more viscous. The grassland warhorses in the city and the warhorses in the Tang camp outside the city all looked up at the sky at the same time, becoming a little anxious and restless, but too afraid to neigh to vent their emotions. The aura of heaven and earth was undergoing a drastic change. The heaven and earth that human eyes could see did not change at all. It was even more tranquil and beautiful than before. In the silence, suddenly there were countless hissing sounds, and then a horrible scene appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The mountain of corpses of the cavalrymen and warhorses in front of the city of Wei collapsed. He watched as his building collapsed. When the building collapsed, it must have disintegrated, starting from the eaves and beams of the building. The mountain of corpses also began to disintegrate from the inside. The tough leather armor and the strong body of the warhorse instantly disintegrated, turning into countless pieces of flesh and blood. The thin waterfall formed by the blood became much thicker, and then everything fell apart. In the middle of the mountain of corpses in front of the city of Wei, there was a huge gap, about 2 feet wide. Apart from blood and flesh soaking in the bloody water, there was nothing else in the wound. The streets of the city could be seen at a glance. People standing in the city could also clearly see the scenery outside the city. But at this moment, there was no one left standing in the city of Wei. The streets were filled with fallen yellow soil and accumulated dust. The wind was howling incessantly. The peasants and slaves who were carrying the bodies of the cavalrymen, and the hundreds of duo cavalry who were standing in the middle of the street ready to charge at the Tang camp, all disappeared. Just like the bodies of the cavalrymen in the gap of the mountain of corpses. These lives, which were still alive a moment ago, had now become formless chunks of flesh and blood. The street became the coldest and most terrifying Shiraba in the Buddhism sect. There was nothing left except death. This was a tunnel of death. This was an arrow path. The arrow path extended from the south to the north of the city, breaking a mud wall in the north of the city. Dozens of carriages on the wall emitted clear light, protecting themselves. The corners of the carriages were damaged, revealing something pale inside, which looked like human bones. The national master looked to the south, his face pale. The people who were affected by the arrow path fled in all directions, bleeding, avoiding the second attack that did not happen. There were panicked shouts everywhere, only quieting down after a long time. The people hid behind the wheels, behind the uneasy horses, following the national master's gaze to the south. Their faces were full of fear, and their eyes were even showing signs of losing focus. At this moment, a straight Lang Ning Yun slowly appeared in the sky above the streets of the city of Wei. Some people had already guessed who the person who shot the arrow was. Now that the famous Lang Ning Yun appeared in front of them, their guesses were confirmed. In an instant, thousands of people died, half of them were duo cavalry who were ready to charge. This was not a massacre, but it was more terrifying. Facing such an unimaginable scene, facing an enemy beyond imagination, the grassland people could not even be angry, only fear and despair. Even the bravest man in the tribe lost all confidence at this moment. Scattered sounds of hooves came from the south gate of the city of Wei. The smoke and dust from the gap in the mountain of corpses gradually settled. A man walked in from there. An old horse was dragging an old cart behind him. The cart was filled to the brim with arrows. The man carried a quiver on his back and an iron bow on his shoulder. The man's clothes were mottled by the blood and dust that fell from the sky. He was wearing an ordinary Tang military uniform. He looked like an ordinary soldier of the Tang army. He was just an ordinary soldier of the Tang. Many years ago, he was a soldier in the city of Wei. After many years, he finally returned to the city. He was a wanderer who returned to his hometown at the border village. He was a veteran who dreamed of the Horn Battalion. He was covered with dust and unstoppable. I don't want to write words of reminiscence. Please vote for me. Thank you. Chapter 1092. The final battle between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe began on a spring morning. From the beginning to the end, Su Chi's central tent only paid the price of tens of thousands of crossbow bolts. They did not have to do anything else, and over 1,000 of the most elite duo cavalry died in the hands of one person. They died to that person's arrows. Chanyu rode on horseback and looked in the direction of the city of Wei behind him. He looked terrible. After the headmaster of the academy ascended to heaven, the unwritten rules in the cultivation world were all erased. Later, Lu Yiqing entered the palace alone and killed the emperor of the South Jin kingdom. This represented the emergence of a new world and new rules. With the spring wind and rain, the form of war began to undergo unimaginable drastic changes. The few powerhouses might not be able to decide the direction of the human world, but they were starting to have the right to decide the outcome of a war, such as the one in the city of Wei today. In the past, such a change was described by the dead Lu Yiqing, the domineering Henmu Liren in Qinghe Prefecture, or Jun Emo in front of the Verdant Canyon. But it was not until Ning Ke appeared in the city of Wei that everyone, including Chanyu, realized that he was the only one who could represent the change of the form of war. Ning Ke was the one who could change the course of a battle to the greatest extent. It was because he had the ability, because he had the means, because he had the thoughts and the absolute will. Come to think of it, ever since he started cultivating, any changes he made to his cultivation methods and weapons could eventually be used on the battlefield. They could all be used to cause the greatest amount of damage. Even Yi Hongyu was not as good as him in this aspect. Perhaps it was because among the most powerful powerhouses in the cultivation world, he was the only one who started from the most common soldier. He was the only one who understood the battlefield the best. Therefore, he should be the one to change the war. In the field to the north of the city of Wei, the sound of retreat had already been heard. The sound of galloping horses could be heard everywhere. The remaining 8,000 duo cavalry were escorting Chanyu to the depths of the grassland. The Golden Tribe royal court still had many cavalrymen and seemed to be able to fight again. But the duo cavalry's morale had been severely damaged. They would never be able to enter the same rhythm again. That was a sure defeat. Chanyu's idea of gambling or risking his life was crushed before it could be implemented. He was defeated before the fight even started, which made him feel real despair. The crossbow battalion was not scary. Even if Su Chi used the crossbow battalion to seal the gate of the city of Wei, it would be meaningless. In fact, he purposely left this opportunity for the Tangs. He believed that his cavalrymen could withstand the terrifying rain of crossbows and turn the pain and death into courage bestowed by the Tengri heaven. He did not expect that the duo cavalry, who could defend against the rain of arrows, who could ignore death, would not be able to charge through that person's arrows. Their courage was numbed by the shock. That person seemed to be scarier than death. But so what if they left the city of Wei? According to the calculation of the high priest and the wise men, the Tang army would not give them too much time. The seemingly green and pleasant grassland, the incomparably familiar environment, could only become the graveyard of the palace's cavalrymen. Even if they returned to their hometown in the depths of the grassland, how many of them could survive? Chan Yu looked at the road to the north with a pale face. He thought of the loyal warriors left in the city of Wei and the national master and high priests in the south. He felt an extreme pain in his chest. The Golden Tribe royal court was destroyed by Ning Kei's arrows before they could launch their final attack. Although it was hopeless to retreat, it was an inevitable choice. However, if they did not want to be chased by the Tang army, or to be harassed or even destroyed by Ning Kei's horrifying tactics, someone had to stop him. More than 2,000 elite cavalrymen were left inside and outside the city of Wei, ready to sacrifice their lives to slow down the pursuit of Su Qi's 6,000 cavalrymen. As for the cavalrymen in Kaiping and Chu City, they could only be wiped out one by one in despair. Naturally, the Golden Tribe royal court also left someone to stop Ning Quebec. There was no one else. It could not be anyone else. It could only be a de Ning Kei walked on the streets of the city of Wei. His military boots stepped on the powdery organs and blood, making a pa-pa sound. Sometimes it felt like a young girl's bare feet stepping on a barrel of grape wine. He walked out of the southern part of the blood-soaked road and got closer to the flag of the Golden Tribe. He was about to take a step forward when he suddenly retracted his right foot and landed on the ground. He then looked to the side of the road. He alone had scared off the entire Golden Tribe royal court. Throughout history, such a thing had rarely happened. 1,000 years ago, the headmaster of the academy alone had scared off the entire West Hill Divine Palace. Of course he was more arrogant and powerful. But what Ning Kei had done was already very impressive. However, he could not scare off the person by the side of the road. A young man from the grassland was standing by the side of the road. The young man had been sitting in an abandoned restaurant by the side of the road for a whole night, waiting for Ning Kei's arrival. Because of this, he did not face the horrifying iron arrow directly. No one knew whether it was the young man's luck or the Duoer cavalry's misfortune. I can't stop that iron arrow, but it can't kill me either. The young man from the grassland looked at Ning Kei and said calmly, "And now you are too close to me. I can see your movements clearly. So it's even more impossible for you to kill me with an iron arrow. Let's try another way." Besides the iron bow, Ning Kei also had a cutlass on his shoulder, that heavy, dark and sharp iron cutlass. But it was obvious that he had no intention of pulling it out. He just looked at the young man quietly. He knew that the young man was a De. He was the most powerful close combat powerhouse in the Golden Tribe royal court. He had long replaced General Lebu's position. It was said that he was the last disciple of the national master. But his real combat power might not be weaker than the national master. The young man might even be the most powerful human on the grassland. But just 2 years ago, he was just a poor slave. He was thin, bullied and could die at any time. What changed everything was that spring breeze that turned into light rain. Ning Kei subconsciously looked up at the blue sky and then shook his head. According to his usual temperament, he had no interest in talking to this young powerhouse called a De. Just like what Yi Hongyu once said, since they were going to fight, why talk so much nonsense? In the end, it all depended on who would die and who would live. But because of that spring breeze and rain, he was suddenly curious about this young man. "Who named you?" Ning Kei asked. A De said, "I named it myself." Ning Kei asked, "Why did you name yourself?" In the words of you people from the Central Plains, a De means very good at fighting. Ning Kei smiled and said, "I have stayed here for many years. My grassland barbarian language is better than yours. I know that a De means cheap. De means bone. You are a cheap bone." Hearing this, a Da's face turned gloomy. "The national master asked you to stay and stop me, which means he asked you to die." Ning Kei ignored his expression and said, "Get out of my way. For her sake, I will leave your body intact. Ada didn't know who he was talking about. He just felt angry. Because obviously, Mr. 13 of the Academy did not see him as a real opponent. Why? He had always thought that he respected the Academy. Yes, he had always wanted to kill his way to Chang'an and kill all those strange people in the back of the mountain of the Academy. But he thought it represented his respect. Why did Ning Ke have such an attitude? I admit that you are powerful. Ada looked at the blood-stained long street and the iron bow on Ning Ke's shoulder. He sneered and said, but you don't know how powerful I am. What right do you have to look down on me when you can't use the iron arrow? He was angry, but he was smiling. He wanted to express his contempt in this way. No matter how high Ning Ke's state of cultivation was, he was only at the upper state of knowing destiny. Now that the primordial 13 arrows had lost their greatest power, he did not think that his opponent was his opponent. The task given to him by Chanyu and the National Master was to stop Ning Ke, slow him down when he passed the city of Wei, and then wait for a chance to leave. He agreed in silence, but he was thinking about something else. He was the gift from Tingri to the grassland. He was the only embodiment of the vast and mighty will. How could he lose to a human like Ning Ke? He wanted to defeat him fair and square. Ning Ke had stopped smiling. He looked at him quietly and said, "Then you shall die." Ada squinted his eyes and a cruel expression appeared on his young and dark face. He took a deep breath, and his chest rose like a mountain rising from the grassland. In just a breath, half of the air on the streets of the city of Wei was inhaled into his body. At the same time, there seemed to be endless qi of heaven and earth pouring into his body. His physique was completely changed by the spring wind and rain. He was very close to the qi of heaven and earth on the grassland. He could breathe in the qi of heaven and earth at a speed that other cultivators could not imagine. What did it mean? It meant that he had an inexhaustible power. After he became the National Master's disciple, he even learned the cultivation method of the Enlightenment doctrine. The National Master was knowledgeable and well-versed in 3 arts. Besides, he was a good friend of Xiong Chumo, so it was not surprising that he had such a method. In other words, Ada had been possessed by the devil. His body was harder than a real stone, and his life was more tenacious than a real stone. With the blessing of Tingri, he felt that he should be invincible. Yes, he was afraid of Ning Ke's iron arrow. But after seeing the iron arrow today, he still felt that he could try to take it head-on. It was not hard to imagine his strong confidence. As Ada breathed, the qi of heaven and earth was in chaos. A gust of wind blew in the city of Wei. He looked at Ning Ke as if he was looking at a dead man. He wanted to do what Chanyu and the National Master did not expect him to do. He wanted to save the fate of the royal court. He wanted to be the new sun on the grassland and shine on the entire human world. That was why he had remained silent in this war, watching everything happen quietly. Only now did he walk onto the street and block Ning Ke's path, ready to kill him. Everyone inside and outside of the city of Wei felt the drastic change of the qi of heaven and earth. Ordinary people could not see the change of the qi of heaven and earth, but they could see the strange phenomenon. A dark cloud suddenly floated over the city of Wei and blocked all the sunlight. Powerhouses like the National Master and Su Qi could clearly sense that the qi of heaven and earth was rushing towards somewhere. The horrifying power that Ada displayed made the two of them have completely different feelings. The wind blew on the street. The remaining half of the signboard of the tavern was blown to the mud wall, making a muffled sound. The yellow soil on the wall was peeled off. At this moment, Ning Ke suddenly said something. You know what? I used to buy many jars of wine and roasted chicken in this tavern. I won a lot of money, took a lot of people's underwear and rejected many marriage offers. Take a break. Tomorrow I will beat Ada to death. Ada. This name came from a police story. I wish everyone a happy weekend and a successful blind date. Don't talk about marriage with Sang Sang. Chapter 1093. Ning Ke looked at the street. The buildings on both sides of the street were still the same as when he was here years ago. They were all made of yellow soil. After being blown by the wind for a long time, they became soft and turned into yellow sand. Back then, he was playing lewd dangling fist with someone in the inn. Sang Sang was the judge. The master and the servant won money together. Then they walked out of the inn. He walked with his hands behind his back while Sang Sang followed behind him with the wine pot and roasted chicken. It was very strenuous. At that time, they were stepping on the yellow sand. After so many years, the inn was ruined, the old friends were gone, and the yellow sand had turned into blood. What Ning Ke was stepping on now was the blood of his enemies, but also the blood of many old friends. It was inevitable that he missed it. At this moment it was not the time to reminisce about the past. No matter who saw it, the timing of this sentence was very inexplicable. It was very incongruous with the current atmosphere of the battle. As a result, Ada's face became extremely gloomy. He felt that Ning Ke was humiliating him on purpose. He calmed himself down and breathed out the foul air. He stepped on the Taoist stone and struck forward with a punch. It was a very simple move. It could not even be considered as a move. However, in the simplicity, there was extreme power. Therefore, the speed was also extremely fast. A light explosion was heard on the street. That was the result of the air being squeezed away rapidly. Ada's fist was like an arrow, hitting in front of Ning Quebec. Just like what he said, he was very good at fighting. Such a simple punch was so majestic, with the unique roughness of the grassland. It actually had the feeling of Liu Bai's great river sword. If it were any other cultivator, they would probably choose to retreat when faced with such a fist, because the weakest part of a cultivator was their body. To fight against an enemy who cultivated the methods of the Enlightenment doctrine, absorbed the world into his body, and possessed immense strength, the first thing he had to do was to put some distance between himself and his opponent. But Ning Ke did not retreat. Ada knew that Ning Ke would not retreat. He knew that Ning Ke had already joined the devil and his body was equally strong. Ning Ke had enough strength, no matter the strength or the strength of his body, to take this punch head-on. That was the moment that Ada was waiting for. He wanted to create an environment where he could fight head-on. Because he had countless backup plans and countless tough means, he needed a receiving surface to provide support. Just like those terrifying sandstorms in the grasslands at the turn of spring and summer, they weren't that scary when passing through the open plains. As long as one maintained a distance, one could even view those scenes as rare and beautiful scenery. However, when someone or something was in the middle of those sandstorms and began to bear the power of the sandstorms, they would instantly be riddled with holes and broken beyond repair. Ada's fist and his cultivation method was the sandstorm. As long as Ning Ke did not retreat, as long as Ning Ke took it head-on, the sandstorm would devour him. However, to his surprise, Ning Ke did not choose to dodge or retreat, nor did he use the devil's doctrine's methods to block it. From the front, it seemed that he did not do anything. There was no expression on Ning Ke's face. The iron bow was still on his shoulder and the iron cutlass was still on his back. He even had his hands behind his back. It seemed that he did not care about the fist that was about to hit him. No one could really ignore it. That fist belonged to Ada, carrying the divine power left by Haotian on the grassland. In fact, Ning Ke had already made his own response, but Ada did not see it. His hands that were behind his back were spread out. His right hand quickly wrote a word in the air. When he finished writing the word, his face turned pale. At the same time, an unimaginably vigorous psyche power was emitted from his body and spread to the heaven and earth. The chi of heaven and earth in the city of Wei was pouring into Ada's body. All of a sudden, it became stagnant. After a moment, the chi of heaven and earth seemed to have heard some order and began to condense into a shape. The violent sandstorm passed through the street and blurred everyone's sight. Ning Ke wrote a word. That word was a talisman. The sandstorm did come. But it was not caused by a de. It was caused by him. Countless yellow sand flew up from the ground, the walls, and the tables and chairs that no one cared about in the inn. It came to the street at an unimaginable speed and came to the front of Ada's fist. A wisp of yellow sand was a tie. There was an amazing amount of chi of heaven and earth in it. Hundreds of wisps of yellow sand rose from the streets and buildings of the city of Wei. Following Ning Ke's order, they fell on Ada's fist and became a tie. It was as if his fist was wrapped with countless layers of gauze. Old, pus-stained, yellow gauze. Ning Ke used the bind talisman. The yellow sand in the city of Wei was his talisman. Ada instantly felt that his fist had smashed into a piece of desert. The desert was bottomless and there was a faint flow under it. The horrifying force was tearing his hand. He was not afraid of the tearing pain. Instead, he became more clear-headed. He growled and loosened his fist. His 5 fingers were like 5 machetes. With the unparalleled strength, he directly cut through the countless layers of yellow sand on his fist. Ning Ke looked at the yellow sand gradually breaking. He raised his right hand and wrote several strokes. Obviously, his word was very simple. Ada's first punch had ended. He forcibly broke free from the bind talisman and regained his freedom. The first thing he did was to take a heavy step forward. He stepped on the ground. With the power of heaven and earth, he raised his fist again. It was still a simple punch. It was aimed at Ning Ke's face. What he pursued was very simple. What he wanted was also very simple. He did not expect that this punch could defeat Ning Quebec. He did not even think that it could hurt Ning Quebec. He only hoped that Ning Ke could take it. As long as Ning Ke chose to take it, he would have a way. Ning Ke still did not take it. What took the second punch from Ada was the second talisman he wrote. When he wrote this talisman, he was not looking at Ada's fist, but the streets of the city of Wei. The city of Wei was a military stronghold. It was a real small city. It could only accommodate a few people. There were not many buildings either. There were only 4 main streets, 2 in both horizontal and vertical directions. If one looked down from the sky, the main street of the city of Wei formed the character. Jing, it was a coincidence. The most powerful talisman of Master Yen Sei was the Jing talisman. The first talisman that Ning Ke learned was also the Jing talisman. It was also a coincidence. Ning Ke looked at the streets of the city of Wei and wrote the very simple Jing talisman. This talisman had once cut the space on the nameless mountain in the north of Chang'an. It turned the infinite light summoned by Elder Wei Guangming into fragments in the mirror. It could be imagined how powerful this Jing talisman was. Ada's soul was cleansed by the spring rain. He was extremely sensitive to the changes of the chi of heaven and earth. Although he did not know talisman Taoism, he instantly felt the changes of the heaven and earth. His face changed dramatically. Facing such a horrible and sharp talisman, he did not dare to continue punching. A roar resounded through the street. He took a step back with great difficulty. He crushed the street in front of the tavern and returned all the accumulated strength to the earth. Only then he could take back his fists and cover his face with them. Ning Ke today might be slightly different from his master Yen Sei in the understanding of talisman Taoism. But when it came to the depth of cultivation of talisman Taoism, they had already reached the same place. Even a powerhouse like Wei Guangming had to surpass the 5 states to block this Jing talisman. Although Ada's cultivation state of devil's doctrine was equal to the peak of the 5 states, he could only seek for self-preservation. Self-preservation, he could only use his own body to protect his life. At this moment in the city of Wei, nothing was more trustworthy and more powerful than his own body. The wind was blowing wildly on the long street. Yellow sand filled the sky. Ada's figure was about to be swallowed up. It seemed that he would fall at any time. But he did not fall. His fists actually blocked most of the talisman. No wonder he was the gift from Hautian to the grassland. His body strength had indeed exceeded the scope of ordinary powerhouses of the devil's doctrine. After a long time, the talisman and the infinite chi of heaven and earth summoned by the Jing talisman finally dissipated in the heaven and earth. The yellow sand gradually fell and the wind was gone. Ada slowly loosened his fists and looked at Ning Ke again. His body was covered with terrifying wounds, and countless amounts of blood flowed out like a waterfall. His two toughest fists were already bony, and it was a terrifying sight to behold. The most important thing was that the bone necklace hanging around his neck had already turned into powder. His proudest and most confident body was broken. His last life-saving item had already been blown away by the wind. But he was still alive. As long as he was alive, he could win. I thought you had already lost the courage to fight and the ability to kill after being imprisoned in Chang'an for so many years. I never thought that you still have so many skills. It seems that I have underestimated the academy after all. Ada stared at Ning Quebec. The childishness on his face had already been smeared by the blood. His eyes were emitting cold light like a wolf and endless killing intent. Unfortunately, you still can't kill me. Although I don't know how you saw through my cultivation method and refused to take my fists, but I want to know more. Such a powerful talisman couldn't kill me. Besides taking my fists, what else can you do? Ada looked very miserable at this moment. But his tone was like a real winner. He looked at Ning Ke without hiding his killing intent and contempt, as if he was looking at an old beast that was about to die. Ning Ke looked at him calmly and said, I can still kill you. Ada grinned with a cruel smile and said, this human world might have belonged to you people before, but it will belong to us in the end. Because we are younger. After saying this, he raised his fist again. His fist was bleeding. Under the gloomy clouds, the ghastly white bones looked especially terrifying. He gathered all his strength into this fist. Ning Ke stretched out his right hand and wrote another character on the street of the city of Wei. This character was even simpler than the character of Jing. It only had half of the strokes. Half of the character of Jing could only be 2. He wrote a talisman of 2. 2 unimaginably powerful talisman intents suddenly shrouded the entire city of Wei. It even spread outside the city of Wei. The remaining half of the signboard of the tavern suddenly swung to the middle of the street and hung in the air, looking like a knife. A hole suddenly appeared in the wall of a small courtyard. A hunting knife that had been hidden for many years stretched out half of its body from the hole, as if it wanted to see this strange world again. Those grassland cavalries that were retreating outside the city of Wei suddenly found that their cutlasses started to collide in the sheath and wanted to leave. And the Tang army that was preparing to chase found that they wanted to draw out their swords to kill the enemy. The 2 talisman intents were both knife intents. Ada's face turned extremely ugly because he smelled the scent of death. He never thought that Ning Ke had more powerful means, and he never thought that he couldn't even tell whether it was talisman intents or knife intents. He let out an angry and unwilling roar and was forced to withdraw his fist again. He burst out the chi of heaven and earth stored in his body and retreated to the back of the street, hoping to get out of the range of the 2 talisman intents. However, Ning Ke's 2 talisman had already shrouded the entire city of Wei. How could he escape? The strong wind blew again. Ada let out a painful and frustrated cry. His clothes were torn into pieces, and then his skin started to tear. The blood that had just stopped gushing out of his body again. He stopped retreating and covered his face with his fists, struggling to hold on in the strong wind. Finally, Ning Ke moved and rushed forward. Outside the city of Wei, the National Master looked at the black wind that rolled like a dragon under the gloomy clouds. He looked at the sand there and sensed the sharp talisman intense there. His expression didn't change, but his eyes revealed deep worry and vigilance. Looking at the strange sky, those grassland cavalries looked even more terrible. Suddenly, people heard a thunder in the city of Wei, and then there were countless thunders. The National Master withdrew his gaze and sat back in the carriage. The wind calmed down and the sand fell. The black cloud also disappeared. The sunlight fell on the streets and buildings of the city of Wei again. The blue sky returned to people's sight. It was peaceful and pleasant. There was a pit on the straightest and longest street in the city of Wei. A De was lying at the bottom of the pit, covered with blood and bones sticking out of his body. He was dying and looked extremely miserable. If it wasn't for Haotian's blessing, he would have died long ago. Ning Ke slowly straightened his body. His chest rose and fell slightly, his right hand trembled slightly, and his face was slightly pale. But his expression was as calm as before, as if he didn't throw out 300 punches in a few seconds. The continuous thunder that everyone outside the city heard was the sound of his punches landing on Ada's body. His face was a little pale. It had nothing to do with the consumption of energy, but because he had written 3 divine talismans in a row. Even with his extremely vigorous psyche power, he still felt a little tired. Ada coughed painfully. Blood spilled out from the corner of his mouth. He turned his head with difficulty and looked at Ning Quebec. His eyes were full of confusion and fear. Maybe it was to cover up this emotion, it turned into some kind of contempt at last. He was very unwilling because he still had many tricks that he hadn't used. So he used his eyes to mock Ning Quebec. In the end, you still don't dare to take my punches. Ning Ke didn't say anything. It was not that he didn't dare to take the punches of this grassland lad, but he didn't need to. He didn't care to take it. Just like now, it was not that he couldn't explain, but he didn't want to. What he wanted to explain was another matter. You said you were good at fighting, so I beat you to death. He looked at Ada who was about to die and said, I know it's cruel, but you barbarians don't have the word cruel. So it doesn't matter. I just want your people who are still alive to be more afraid. Yes, many people were scared at this moment, so scared that they were trembling all over. The grassland cavalries outside the city were trembling and whipping their horses with all their might. They wanted to escape as fast and as far as possible. Even the well-disciplined duo or cavalry formation was a little messed up. The grassland cavalries in the city were trembling and didn't dare to move. The thunder-like sound of punches landing on bodies in the sandstorm had already made them let go of the reins and cover their ears in fear. No one would have thought that the battle would end like this. In the hearts of the grassland cavalries, Ada was a gift from the immortal heaven to the grassland. He was an undefeated warrior. How could he be beaten like a dog by the Tang army? The National Master and Chanyu were clear about the power of the academy. They didn't think that Ada could defeat Ning Ke, but they thought that he could hold his opponent for a while and even find a chance to escape. Who would have thought that Ning Ke could win so easily and naturally? Ada himself had said before that Ning Ke's iron arrow had lost its greatest power. So what else could he do? He was indeed very strong, but he had forgotten one very important thing. He only remembered that Ning Ke's iron arrow could shock the world, and he only remembered that Ning Ke joined the devil. But he forgot that after Ning Ke started cultivation, he didn't cultivate sword, devil or psyche power, but talisman. Ning Ke's real identity had always been a talisman master. He was now a divine talisman master. Since the right to light in the Peach Mountain, he hadn't used talisman for a long time, so many people had forgotten his identity. But he was a divine talisman master, one of the 2 most powerful divine talisman masters in the world after Yen Sei and the master of calligrapher. A talisman master was invincible in the same state. A divine talisman master could be invincible under the 5 states. Unless he met a real genius like Liu Bai, Jun Mo, and Yi Su who didn't follow the normal rules. A real genius had nothing to do with heaven. Talent was not given by heaven, but obtained by oneself through hard cultivation, peerless talent and supreme willpower. Once it was obtained, it couldn't be lost. Da's cultivation talent and everything he had were given by Haotian. So he wasn't a real genius. Then as long as he was still within the 5 states, even if he had mastered the devil's doctrine's art in just 1 year and reached the peak of the 5 states according to the standard of the cultivation world, he still couldn't be a match for a divine talisman master. Da didn't know if he finally understood something before he died. His eyes quickly dimmed. There was unwillingness, sadness, anger and despair in the depth of the dimness. Because in this battle, the gap between him and Ning Ke was too big, so big that it couldn't be narrowed. It was so big that it made him feel hopeless. Even if he had to fight again, he couldn't see any possibility of winning. Why? The final radiance of the setting sun before his death allowed him to speak. He blankly looked at the blue sky and murmured, "Why? Why?" At the last moment, the problem that still troubled this grassland lad and made his soul unable to rest had nothing to do with the state of cultivation. It was only related to faith. Da was very proud and confident because he firmly believed that he was a gift from Haotian to the grassland. He firmly believed that his strength had its own reasons and he would never fail. Wouldn't his failure mean the failure of Haotian? This was something that could not possibly happen. However, in front of this man, this matter just happened as it should. What was going on? "This is my city." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "I left Chang'an, but this is still my city. No one can defeat me in Chang'an, and no one can defeat me here." Da shook his head painfully and said while gasping, "But Tingri, it said that you and Hengmu are her gifts to the human world. Although she has always been in charge of the money at home, she didn't ask for my permission before she gave you these gifts." Ning Ke was silent for a moment and then said, "Since she is not here now, I think it's reasonable for me to take back these gifts." I think she would be too embarrassed to object. It was not until now that Da realized who was the she that Ning Ke said before the battle that he would leave his body intact for the sake of her. His eyes became extremely confused, and then he started to cry silently in despair and pain. In the end, he closed his eyes and couldn't see the sky anymore. "From now on, I will keep killing people at night. Please cast your monthly votes to help me kill. Thank you." Chapter 1094. Da died. No matter whether he accepted the fact or not, he closed his eyes and left the world. It had been exactly 1 year since he became a powerhouse of the royal court from a slave. He was a young man from the grassland. He had a firm belief and a true love for his tribe. It was indeed cruel to destroy his belief before he died. Ning Ke was a cruel man. Ning Ke had always been a cruel person. He knew how cruel and bloodthirsty this grassland lad was when he killed the Tangs. But he was not a perverted person who would destroy his enemy's faith before his death to gain some kind of pleasure. He inherited Lotus Mantle, but he was not Lotus. The reason why he said those words to Da at the last moment was that he always insisted on a principle: a man could live a muddled life, but he should die sober. He asked himself that, so he treated others the same way. And the time he said those words was also the time for him to adjust his qi circulation. Since he was free, he should do something meaningful. When Da closed his eyes, he had finished adjusting his qi circulation. The raging waves in his sense of perception had calmed down. The crystal bead condensed by the Great Spirit in his lower abdomen was shining brightly. Everything was in order. He looked at the grassland in the north outside of the city of Wei. He bent his knees slightly, and the bluestone under his feet cracked inch by inch. An unimaginable power passed from his knees to the ground and back again. With a loud bang, he left the street and jumped to the blue sky. It was like jumping to the blue sea. He jumped very high and broke through the cool air. In an instant, he was far away from the ground and was more than 1,000 feet high in the sky. Looking down from here, the city of Wei had become an inconspicuous mound and the wilderness seemed to have become a big carpet. The flag of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could be seen faintly in the distance. But he did not know if Chanyu was there. On the wilderness, hundreds of clouds of dust were getting thicker and thicker. Each cloud of dust represented a grassland person who was running for their lives. They were running for their lives because they wanted to survive. Because he was high, he could see very far. He looked around, trying to see something, until the Tianxi Mountains became a black line in his sight. But he still did not see the person he wanted to see. He was not the headmaster of the academy and could not truly fly freely. No matter how high he jumped, there would always be a moment when he would fall. However, he could choose the timing and direction of his fall. The next moment, he landed on the surface of the wilderness. His speed became faster and faster. The wind blew against his Tang uniform, making a crackling sound like an explosion. But he did not even squint his eyes. He had to stare at the place where he landed. As he got closer and closer to the ground, he could see the cavalry and carriages galloping across the plains clearly. He could even see the terrified expressions on the cavalry's faces and the wooden boxes on the carriages. Those carriages were his targets. The national master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court was in that carriage. As for Chanyu and the last cavalryman of the Golden Tribe Royal Court who had fled dozens of miles to the north, he did not care. What he needed to do now was to kill that mysterious and powerful imperial tutor. There was a deafening sound of air tearing in the sky above the wilderness. A person's figure fell from the blue sky like a meteorite. Behind him, there was a faint flame caused by the friction. However, because he fell too fast, he was completely left behind. The grassland warhorses were terrified and kept neighing. They ignored the whipping of their masters and spun around on the spot. The carriages stopped where they were. No matter how hard the drivers shouted, they could not move forward. There was a loud bang. One of the carriages was smashed and turned into dust. The carriages turned into countless splinters of wood that were as thick as fingers and shot out in all directions. The horses and cavalrymen who were unable to escape immediately had many wounds on their bodies. Miserable cries rang out incessantly, and the scene was extremely bloody. The dust gradually settled and Ning Kei's figure appeared in front of everyone. He looked at the national master in front of him and said, "It seems that you have long guessed that I would come." The national master of the Golden Tribe sat cross-legged on the ground in front of him. His old face looked calm. Ning Kei jumped down from the sky and crushed the entire carriage with one foot, but he did not kill him. Just when his foot crushed the carriage and came to the top of the national master's head, the national master suddenly disappeared from where he was and came to the other side of the carriage. When the entire carriage was destroyed, the national master sat on the plains. There were weeds and wildflowers everywhere on the plains and they surrounded him. The national master did not pick any wildflowers. He just looked at one in front of him and said calmly, "I have been waiting for someone from the academy to jump down from the sky. I just did not expect that it would be you." Ning Kei looked around and looked at the seemingly scattered carriages. He felt a mysterious and strange aura gradually becoming stronger. The aura was filled with the primitive smell of blood. "This is what you've been preparing for?" He looked back at the national master in front of him and said, "You should be very clear that no tactical array can hurt me, no matter how strong it is." The wrinkles on the national master's face relaxed at the same time. He looked at Ning Kei and said expressionlessly, "You have mastered the Great Spirit and your body is as hard as gold and stone. But this does not mean that you are really invulnerable." After saying this, his figure suddenly appeared more than 10 feet away and stood on another carriage. The wind on the grassland blew on his coarse clothes and the ordinary wooden bead chains swayed gently. He looked at Ning Kei and said calmly, "The academy is indeed extraordinary. I thought I had valued you enough, but I did not expect that I still underestimated you. I thought that you would at most be at the peak of knowing destiny state after leaving Chang'an. I did not expect that you could defeat Ada so easily. But I still want to try to trap you. If I can trap you, I will have the chance to kill you. The National Master did not say this, but Ning Ke understood what he meant. He looked at him and thought of the 2 times that the National Master showed ghost-like movements. He slightly raised his eyebrows. He had a weird feeling because it did not make sense. Even the most powerful cultivators, such as the Abbey Dean and the eldest brother, who were in the distanceless state, could not come and go as fast as lightning in such a small area. He looked around and looked at the carriages scattered in the field. He felt the primitive and barbaric smell of blood and the gradually materialized array intent. He roughly grasped something. This was the preparation of the National Master of the Golden Tribe. He used himself as bait to lure the enemy into the array. His original position was the array eye, but he had the ability to leave and trap the enemy. It was a simple method, but it was very difficult to realize. Because he had to be able to get rid of the enemy, especially when the enemy was a cultivator at the level of Yu Lian or Ning Quebec. The ability to get rid of the enemy was even vaguely connected with the distanceless state to a certain extent. The National Master stood on the carriage in the distance with his eyes closed. He put his palms together and kept chanting something silently. It was neither the Buddhist scriptures nor the Taoist canon. Listening to the weird sounds, it was more like the witchcraft prayers commonly used by the grassland priests. The chi of heaven and earth on the grassland changed dramatically. Countless gusts of wind blew from all directions and stopped outside the caravan. They began to roll up continuously, sucking the air in the caravan and throwing it into the sky. In an instant, the air around Ning Ke became extremely thin, and the warm and pleasant feeling brought by the morning breeze and morning light disappeared. In the next moment, Ning Ke smelled a strong smell of blood. The air around him suddenly became extremely cold. The smell of blood and coldness even invaded his body and reached the depths of his sense of perception, snow mountain and ocean of chi. His psyche power was a little stagnant, and the spinning speed of the crystal-clear water droplets condensed from the Great Spirit in his lower abdomen was forced to slow down. What was even more shocking was that the snow mountain was covered with an extremely thick layer of new snow. The dark clouds came to the sky above the grassland again, covering the warm sun. Ning Ke slightly lowered his head and did not sit down. He silently resisted the powerful array intent and thought about how to break it. He did not try to walk out because there was no path in front of him. In the cold big array, the surface of his body was quickly covered with a layer of frost. His eyebrows were covered with 2 streaks of white snow, which looked a little funny and a little scary. He did not think of a way to break the array because he could not determine where the National Master was in the array. The National Master was indeed the strongest person in the grassland. His state was unfathomable. He was obviously not a master of array, but he had used a very strange method in the Central Plains cultivation world to build such a big array with carriages in the wilderness and trap him. The National Master finished the scripture or incantation that no one could understand. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Ning Ke calmly. He said, "There are boxes in the carriages. There are bones in the boxes. They are all the bones of the Tangs. Chanyu collected them for me for several years. Maybe some of them belong to the garrison of the city of Wei." Ning Ke raised his head and stared at him. His eyes were as sharp as a knife. The National Master did not seem to notice the hidden meaning in his eyes. He continued, "I know you used to live in the city of Wei. You must have an old relationship with some of the bones in the box. Unfortunately, they are already dead. The remaining souls are only resentment and no old relationship with you. They still want to be a part of my power to kill you." This was the foundation of the blood sacrifice array. The National Master was well versed in 3 ways. He had a high state and profound knowledge. He gathered the power of faith with Buddhism, collected souls with witchcraft, and used Taoism to build this big array with the power of heaven and earth. For this, he did not hesitate to sacrifice his lifespan. Because only such a blood sacrifice formation would be able to accomplish his goal. The great spirit in Ning Kei's body had been gradually frozen. The smell of blood had even made his sense of perception a little shaken and uneasy. However, his mind was still clear. He stared at the National Master and said, "Why are you telling me this?" When he said this, the frost on his eyebrows had already grown to about a foot. "Because what you said before Ada died was very reasonable." The National Master looked at him and said with pity, "People can live muddle-headed, but they should die with a clear mind." "Very good," Ning Kei said. The National Master asked, "What's very good?" Ning Kei looked at him and said, "I have already planned to exterminate the Golden Tribe Royal Court. No matter who comes to persuade me, I will not change my mind. I don't need anything to help me to make up my mind. But what you have done, can give me more powerful excuses when eldest brother questions me in the future." The National Master understood what he meant. After a moment of silence, he said, "Everything is an excuse." Ning Kei looked at the horse carriage under his feet. He looked at the slightly damaged box on the carriage. He looked at the faintly visible white bones in the box. Finally, he slowly took a step forward. "So tired. My neck. I haven't had it for a long time. I want to resume swimming." Chapter 1095. Ning Kei's steps were firm. Unfortunately, he still couldn't get closer to the National Master. However, he was not disappointed. An attempt was just an attempt. He believed that he would eventually find a way to find the other party in this formation of carriages and then kill him. The National Master was silent. The rosary beads between his thumb and index finger started to move by itself, releasing its own aura. The bloody smell in the carriage array suddenly became many times stronger. The smell of blood came from the dead in this field, from the Tang army that had no place to be buried. Ning Kei looked up at him and asked, "You believe in everlasting heaven, but you have done such an evil thing. Don't you worry that you will be punished by the divine kingdom in the future?" The National Master said, "The right thing is the right thing. The means are not important." Ning Kei said, "You know the relationship between me and the everlasting heaven that you believe in." The National Master looked at him and said seriously, "That's the relationship that you, a mortal, think." Ning Kei said, "I will prove to you that the relationship does exist objectively." As he spoke, he had already taken 3 steps towards the carriage. With every step, the frost on his body would fall off. Originally, the frost was one with his body, unable to fall off. However, at this moment, it fell off, because there were flames that were currently spewing out from his body. His footsteps landed on the grassland, leaving behind footprints as well as several clumps of raging flames. The flames were extremely clear, sacred and solemn. They were as white as the snow lotus blooming on the snow-capped peak of Tianqi Mountain. Although he still couldn't get close to the National Master, now, there were several snow lotuses condensed by Haotian's divine light burning in the bloody array, scattering clear light. Those resentful souls that came from the carriages touched the Haotian's divine light. They did not make any painful howls, but were purified into nothingness with a light sizzle. Ning Kei's body was gradually surrounded by Haotian's divine light. Countless resentful souls in the blood-sacrificing array of the National Master could no longer get close to his body. Strangely, the snow on his eyebrows did not melt even though his body was burning. Before those resentful souls were purified, there would be a brief moment when they were alive. Ning Kei did not close his eyes, because there were many things that could not be ignored with his eyes closed. He quietly looked at the faces that appeared and then disappeared, and saw several familiar faces. "Go. If you want to go to Haotian's divine kingdom, I will let her take care of you. If the divine kingdom is destroyed one day, Master will be there to take care of you. If you want to go to the abyss of the netherworld to continue fighting, then please wait for me to meet you again. At that time, we will go and chop firewood. He looked at the countless familiar and unfamiliar faces in the divine light and thought to himself. The imperial advisor's expression was still indifferent, but there was a flicker in the depths of his eyes. He probably did not expect Ning Ke to have so much Haotian divine flame. Logically speaking, only the most devout Haotian Taoism believers could learn the West Hill divine skill and summon Haotian divine flame. The national master was not troubled by this problem for too long, because his state and knowledge were extraordinary. Since he knew about the entanglement between Ning Ke and the everlasting heaven, he did not need to find the real answer for many things. The first thing he needed to do now was to suppress Ning Ke's counterattack. Yes, Ning Ke was burning himself at this time. That was the counterattack against the blood sacrifice array. As Haotian divine flame burned, and as he walked casually in the array of carriages, the whole grassland was illuminated. The cold wind that constantly swirled around the array of carriages had long been broken and dissipated. The temperature rose sharply, and there was no longer any chill. Ning Ke reached out to wipe the water dripping from between his eyebrows, and finally walked in front of a carriage. The imperial advisor was no longer in the carriage. The broken box on the carriage revealed a gap, and the white human bones inside were burning in the blazing Haotian divine flame. They gradually turned yellow and scorched, but it was unimaginable that they were still holding on. Ning Ke pulled out the padao from behind him. Without a word, he directly chopped at the carriage. The carriage collapsed directly, and the box fell heavily on the ground. The outside of the box immediately fell apart, turning into dozens of wooden strips, revealing the things inside. Inside the wooden box was an iron box made of iron bars. Inside the box were human bones, human skulls. It was unknown how many human skulls were needed to collect the whole box. Ning Ke's expression did not change, and he chopped at the iron box again. With a loud bang, the iron box broke through the slightly hard ground, splashing mud and dust everywhere. It desperately drilled into the grassland, and only stopped when it was several feet deep. The iron box still did not break, and countless skulls were still trapped inside, continuously providing power for the blood sacrifice array, and supporting the imperial advisor's plan. Ning Ke looked at the box underground, and remained silent. This is the array base that all the priests of the palace refined with the grand witchcraft, and collected the soul flame for thousands of years. Even if you have the power of the top of the human world, you can't break it, because human strength is limited, but the soul is unlimited. The imperial advisor appeared on a carriage in the south. His clothes were fluttering, and his prayer beads were spinning. He looked at Ning Ke and said with pity, "Since it's futile, why do you insist?" Ning Ke said, "All right. I have to admit that you trapped me. What next? If you can't kill me, then what's the difference between this blood sacrifice array and a child's play?" He turned to the imperial advisor on the carriage and said, "You should know very well that if you trap me to death, then I'll trap you to death. As long as you stay here, you will definitely die." He was right. For the academy, the only person that the Golden Palace needed to seriously deal with was the unfathomable imperial advisor. If he could not leave because he wanted to trap Ning Ke, then when the main force of the Tang army arrived, Su Qi appeared, or even that person himself, the imperial advisor would definitely lose. Strangely, the imperial advisor still looked calm, and was not affected by Ning Ke's words. It seemed that he had absolute confidence that the academy would not do anything to him. Perhaps it was because he thought that he could kill Ning Quebec. More than a dozen high priests appeared from all over the grassland, and then walked to the front of the array. Ning Ke's gaze passed through the burning Haotian divine flame and fell on these people, and on the human bones necklaces in front of their chests. He said, "Finally." The Golden Palace had always used these high priests who were good at witchcraft to fight against the cultivators of the Central Plains. Every high priest had the same level as the cultivators of the Central Plains in the lower knowing destiny state. What would happen when more than a dozen high priests joined the blood sacrifice array? Those old high priests, with trembling lips, began to recite the strange scripture that the nation preceptor had recited before. Then, they began to dance and twist their bodies, performing a dance that no one could understand. The grassland priests were good at witchcraft. The scripture was a spell, and the dance was also a spell. More than a dozen carriages collapsed, and the wooden strips wrapped around the boxes on the carriages cracked, revealing the iron bars inside. The iron boxes slowly floated into the air, and the last one to float was the iron box that Ning Kai had cut deep into the ground. It fell down along with the soil, as if it was an unearthed monster. All the iron boxes were filled with human bones. They were all human skulls, and the remnants of the souls of the deceased were absorbed by the imperial advisor and high priests with the secret witchcraft of the grassland, and scattered in all directions. It was an unimaginably huge pressure, which came from the soul and was applied on top of it. It was invisible and intangible, but it was real, like a giant mountain, directly bombarding Ning Kai's spiritual world. Ning Kai groaned, and blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. But his eyes were still clear. Since he had merged with Sang Sang in the Buddha's chessboard, his body, soul, and psyche power had already reached the peak of the human world. The pressure from countless souls might be able to crush the sense of perception of a powerhouse at the peak of the knowing destiny state, but it could only hurt him. He could still hold on. But being trapped by the blood sacrifice array, it was not a good idea to hold on like this. He did not know how long he could hold on. What he needed to do now was to break the array and kill the enemy. Breaking the array and killing the enemy were two sides of the same coin. In order to break this terrifying blood sacrifice array, the key was to kill the imperial preceptor. In order to kill the imperial preceptor, he must first find his position and determine where he was. However, the problem now was that he didn't know where the imperial preceptor was. The national preceptor was clearly here, right in front of his eyes, on the only remaining horse carriage, yet he seemed to be in a faraway place. He seemed to have merged with the blood sacrifice array, yet he seemed to be looking at this place from somewhere else. Why did he have such a feeling? Previously, when he jumped from the sky, he did not step on the head of the China master. Later, the imperial advisor came and went freely. Maybe there was something hidden in it. Ning Kai looked at the imperial advisor standing in the horse carriage. He looked at his clothes and wooden beads fluttering in the morning wind. He squinted his eyes, and the strange feeling became clearer. Suddenly, he sensed something and looked up at the sky. He saw that in the dark clouds that were disturbed by the blood sacrifice formation, an extremely thin line suddenly appeared. There seemed to be countless resentful souls in the dark clouds. They were the people who died on the grassland. They were the sins of the Golden Tribe royal court over the years. But they were also the collective killing intent of the Golden Tribe royal court towards their enemies. Looking at the dark clouds, Ning Kai could clearly feel the terrifying murderous intent of the Golden Tribe royal court. He also had a deeper understanding of the array intent of the blood sacrificing array. He was sure that it was not something that he could break at the moment. However, his expression suddenly became relaxed. His eyebrows that were once again covered with snow were slightly raised. He seemed to be smiling. "You are indeed an amazing person." He looked back at the sky and looked at the imperial advisor not far away. He said calmly, "I admit that you have the ability to trap me. But, it is not enough. Because you know that I have never been the only one in the academy." The imperial advisor slowly put his palms together like an old monk. His eyes were wide open like a barbaric wizard. He recited a hymn like a Taoist who had been meditating in the deep mountains for many years. He said, "Then when will they arrive?" Such a change in appearance and temperament was indeed extraordinary. However, Ning Kai had seen Master Lotus 32 changes in appearance many years ago at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. How could he be afraid? He said as if he was chatting with the imperial advisor, "Tang has something to do today." Then it is the headmaster who will come today. The imperial advisor's expression did not change. He said calmly, in fact, she is the one I have been waiting for all these years. I really hope that she will not be absent today. It was still a casual conversation. But during the conversation, both of them had strong confidence. Ning Kei's confidence was in the academy, himself and his senior sister. The imperial advisor's confidence was in the tribe. This blood sacrifice array was not the imperial advisor's array, but the array of the entire Golden Tribe royal court. It was a whole tribe, a tribe with millions of people, a tribe with thousands of years of heritage and its own unique culture. This tribe had become an array today. Even if Yu Lian came, how could she break it? The imperial advisor was telling the truth. He had been waiting for Yu Lian for many years. He was waiting for Yu Lian to appear and then kill her. At this moment, Ning Kei said something. Do you think that if you trap me in the array, I can't come to you and she can't? Hearing this, the imperial advisor could no longer be as calm as before. He suddenly felt that it was not he who had been waiting for her all these years, but she who had been waiting for him. There was a barren desert in the northwest of the city of Wei. In the middle of the desert, there was a tiny oasis. The oasis would appear and disappear according to the weather. It appeared less and disappeared more often than not. Neither the Golden Tribe royal court nor the border army of the Tang Empire knew of its existence. To the south of the oasis was Kaiping Market. At this moment, the northern battlefront army led by Situe Lan was engaged in a bloody battle with the remaining army of the Golden Tribe royal court. No one would come here. As for Chanyu and thousands of Duoer cavalry who escaped from the city of Wei, they went straight to the depths of the grassland. They went all the way north and could not pass by the oasis. Logically speaking, there should be no one here. But today, someone suddenly came to the oasis. A grassland cavalryman was leading a warhorse and resting by the only river in the oasis. The horse was an ordinary warhorse and the cavalryman seemed to be an ordinary cavalryman, wearing clothes stained with blood. He looked to the east dozens of miles away, feeling the change of the chi of heaven and earth there, and smiled. Dozens of miles away to the east was the location of the blood sacrifice array in the north of the city of Wei. The cavalryman lowered his head and washed his face. Then he held a handful of water to moisten his throat. The calm stream water reflected his face. It was a young and handsome face. The beard on his cheeks hadn't been trimmed for many days, growing messily like weeds. He looked extremely rough and forthright. Suddenly, his movements became stiff. In the stream, his face was still calm, but there was a wildfire burning deep in his eyes. The clear water slowly leaked through the gaps between his fingers, just like the time that flowed away in his life. When the water completely flowed away, he raised his head and looked to the other side of the stream. A girl in a yellow dress appeared on the other side of the stream. The young girl looked to be around 12 or 13 years old. Her appearance was tender and beautiful, and her two black ponytails swayed lightly behind her. She looked extremely cute, but her expression was cold to the extreme. I heard that you are waiting for me. The girl in the yellow dress looked at the grassland cavalryman and said. Actually, I have always thought that Yu Lian is very handsome. It's a pity that she is not the protagonist. No matter if she is the protagonist or the heroine, I will try to write a similar character in my next book. Then tomorrow's update will be very late. If there is any uncertainty, I will ask my leader to report to you. Chapter 1096. The grassland cavalryman was a little surprised. He looked around to make sure there was no one else, and then asked, "Who are you?" He didn't answer the girl's question. Instead, he asked for her identity. It seemed very natural, like a real chance encounter. However, in such a remote and unknown green province, it was impossible for a lone grassland cavalryman and a young girl in a yellow dress to meet by chance. He just wanted to give it a try. Unfortunately, the girl did not want to talk too much with him. "You are Ninkia, and I am Yu Lien," said the girl. The grassland cavalryman was silent for a moment. He stood up and wiped the remaining water on his hands. He looked at the other side and said, "You are indeed the legendary 23-year cicada cultivation. You can see through me." In this world, few people knew that the real name of the national master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court was Ninkia, just like few knew that the surname of the hierarch of the Divine Halls of West Hill was Xiong Chumo, and few knew about Yi Hongyu's childhood. But she knew. She knew everything. Because she was the Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine, the mysterious 23-year cicada cultivation. Her name was Yu Lien, and her real name was Lin Wu. Her life was shrouded in fog for others and the entire human world, but she could see everything clearly. Yu Lien looked at him and said, "Your array is indeed interesting." A big array composed of the killing souls and countless resentful souls of the entire Golden Tribe Royal Court was only interesting in her eyes. Of course, it was not easy to get such a comment from her. What was more interesting was the National Master himself. The National Master was at the blood-sacrificing array, but in front of Ning Ke, he was at the stream dozens of miles away in the west. In front of Yu Lien, he was no longer old and tired, but a spirited young cavalryman. What exactly happened? The imperial tutor was already dead, or rather, the old imperial tutor was already dead. He sacrificed all his life for the blood-sacrificing array. His body had decayed into dust, leaving only his spiritual consciousness and the so-called divine soul. Then he turned into this young grassland cavalryman in an unimaginable way. The strange feeling that Ning Ke felt in the array was because the National Master was not real. However, he could not find where the National Master's real body was. Fortunately, Yu Lien could find it. The Imperial Advisor had exhausted his lifespan to create that terrifying blood sacrifice formation. Who would have thought that Yu Lien did not even go there? Instead, she casually walked to the bank of the stream and arrived in front of his real body. The grassland cavalryman had a regretful look in his eyes. If you stared into his eyes, you could see the vicissitudes of life and the sense of calmness that could only be formed by age. Don't feel regretful. Yu Lien looked at him and said calmly, "No matter if you're reincarnating, hiding, or possessing. How can you hide from my eyes?" Yes, this kind of method, which was beyond the scope of human beings, seemed extremely magical and incomprehensible, but who was Yu Lien? She was the 23-year cicada cultivation. She practiced the most incredible and magical method in the cultivation world, and she had experienced the most bizarre and unimaginable changes. The methods used by the imperial tutor were not qualified to be mentioned in front of her. Suddenly, there was the sound of cicadas by the stream. There were no cicadas in the wilderness. There had never been cicadas. But now there were cicadas chirping. It was not mournful, but rather peaceful. Because Yu Lien moved. She lifted her feet and stepped on the clear and peaceful surface of the stream, slowly walking toward them. The wind on the grassland blew her yellow dress, making her look like a little fairy walking on the waves. The Imperial Advisor looked at her bare feet and said, "I thought you would jump down from the sky, but I didn't expect that you would walk over the water." Yu Lien said calmly, "Just like everyone thought that you would guard the rear for the Golden Tribe Royal Court and try your best to keep the people of the Academy here. But I didn't expect that you wanted to escape long ago." The Imperial Advisor asked, "Can't the Academy let me escape?" Yu Lien said, "No, because you are indeed very powerful." After a moment of silence, the Imperial Advisor said, "Thank you. I just wanted to trap you. I want to leave the last bloodline and kindling for the tribe. As for me, I am indeed going to travel around the world." Yu Lien said, "I said, don't feel sorry. You can't fool my eyes. A moment ago, Ning Ke said the same thing over there." The Imperial Advisor looked toward the direction of the blood-sacrificing array in the east. He had some secret connection with that place. He sighed and said, "My regret is not that I failed to hide it from you. I never expected to do so. I only regret that you didn't enter my array." Yu Lian said, "Do you think your array can trap me?" The imperial advisor turned to her and said, "My array can kill you." Yu Lian said, "Xiong Chumo thought so too. I'm different from him." The imperial advisor said calmly, "I'm stricter than him. And when we were at the back of the mountain of the academy, he didn't know who you were, but I always knew. I've been waiting for you." Yu Lian said, "So what?" The imperial advisor held the hilt and looked at her who was walking slowly on the stream. He said, "I want to have a try." He looked like a rough grassland cavalryman. Especially when he held the hilt tightly, a murderous aura that only the army could have shot up to the sky. In stark contrast to his aura, the cavalry uniform on his body began to tear apart. His beard fell without any wind, and even his hair fell down. In just a few moments, he had turned into a monk. A young monk with a murderous aura, a bloodthirsty but kind face. Yu Lian walked to the bank. There was not even a drop of water on her bare feet. She looked at the young monk and praised, "Not bad. Not bad might be extraordinary." At least at this moment, the young monk who was blessed by the bloody killing intent of the entire Golden Tribe royal court might really have that wonderful state. Yu Lian sighed with emotion. She was not afraid or even nervous. She was calm even when facing the Abbey Dean's unimaginable state of pureness, not to mention now. She reached out a finger and pointed it between the young monk's eyebrows. The chirping of the cicadas by the stream suddenly became more intense. They seemed to be restless. The weeds turned into grass chips and danced in the sky like countless cicada wings, cutting the space. Her first move was the most powerful move that surpassed the 5 states. The young monk could not avoid it at all, so he did not dodge. He stared at the slender finger that was getting closer and closer. Ignoring the grass chips that cut his skin tens of thousands of bloody wounds, he held the hilt with both hands and slashed forward. "You miscalculated one thing, the machete was just an ordinary machete. It pierced through the sky, but it seemed to carry the will of countless people and the murderous intent of countless people. There was no saber radiance, but it only moved the heaven and earth." In the world of the machete, the young monk looked at Yu Lian's eyes quietly and told her that she was wrong. Although she saw through his plan and did not walk into his array, she had already walked into his array as long as she came to his side. Because he was the array eye. Wherever he was, the array would be there. This was not an ordinary machete, but a blood-sacrificing array. It carried the killing intent of the entire Golden Tribe royal court, which had been accumulated for hundreds of years, and slashed at the young girl in yellow dress. No matter how powerful Yu Lian was, how could she withstand the will of the entire tribe? Facing the young monk's earth-shattering machete, Yu Lian's response was extremely simple. Her response was not like that of a grand cultivator who had surpassed the 5 states, but more like a child who had just started martial arts. Her method was somewhat presumptuous and even ridiculous. The method was the method of the hand. She put her hands together and wanted to clamp the machete between her palms. Was it really presumptuous? No, it was simple to be terrifying. Everything she did was reasonable. Therefore, the machete that carried the killing intent of the entire Golden Tribe royal court was clamped between her hands. Her hands were small and tender, but the machete could not move an inch further. Her body looked very small, but she seemed to have endless power. Between the young monk's machete in her hands, countless streams of aura sputtered. The stream behind her began to ripple, then boiled, and then turned into steam. The entire stream dried up in the blink of an eye. The fish and weeds in the stream were nowhere to be found. The bottom of the stream also became extremely dry and cracked into countless tiny pieces, like the scales of a dead snake. Those cracks quickly spread to the fields behind the stream, instantly extending to a circle. The ground within a radius of dozens of miles became dry and cracked, like a giant turtle that had died of old age. Her yellow dress and her hair were gently swaying in the wind. Her dress was not burned, but her hair was slightly dry. Yu Lian quietly looked at the young monk behind the machete. The young monk quietly looked at her. There was admiration in his eyes, but no fear. He admired her. She was indeed the Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine, a grand cultivator with unfathomable strength. She could withstand the collective will of the tribe carried by the blood-sacrificing array with only her hands. He was not afraid because he knew very well that Yu Lian could only withstand the machete. It was impossible for her to fight back under such circumstances. He was not at a disadvantage. Yu Lian did not fight back, but her eyes showed a sneer. What was she sneering at? The young monk suddenly understood. His machete forced Yu Lian to stand still by the stream. Yu Lian's hands also fixed him where he was. He could not move. Could he, who was dozens of miles to the east, still move? When the machete hacked at Yu Lian dozens of miles to the west, Ning Ke felt it most clearly, because the soul power that was suppressing him suddenly loosened. The dozens of iron boxes floating in the air suddenly trembled violently. The resentment from the white skulls and the killing intent hidden in the array were drawn by some power and fled to the distance. Ning Ke suddenly turned his head and looked at that place. It was in the west. He knew Third Sister was in the west. The thin line he saw in the cloud was the trace left by Senior Sister. He did not know what she was doing there, but now he had guessed the truth. At this time, he was besieged by dozens of grassland high priests. What could he do? If it were someone else, he might not be able to react in such a short time. But Ning Ke was not someone else. The tacit understanding between him and Yu Lian was hard to imagine. He and Yu Lian rarely met these years, but the tacit understanding was always there. The tacit understanding started many years ago, from the cicadas by the old library, from the hairpin-style small regular script, from the waste token, from the devil, and from their similar temperament. He heard the cicadas dozens of miles to the west. He knew Senior Sister had taken action. He closed his eyes and then opened them. In the west, when the young monk slashed at Yu Lian with his blade. In the east, he hacked at the old national master on the horse carriage. I feel better and better. I'll write more tomorrow and hack the national master to death. As for the chapter titles, the authors of our generation will definitely have a deep imprint of Wuxia novels. No one will be able to get rid of it. I have to thank the predecessors who wrote such cool stories and phrases. The pleasure of reading them is still unforgettable. Chapter 1097. He did not hold back this time. All the great spirit in his body turned into Haotian's divine light and gushed out along with the momentum of the blade. What was more terrifying was that there was also a killing soul in the blade. That was the killing soul of the border army of the Tang Empire. He started cultivating it at Shubi Lake and it was only perfected after the massacre in the city of Wei. The dark blade fell on the head of the national master this time. This time, the national master could no longer move his body like a ghost. Because his body was fixed by Yu Lian at the stream. The national master put his palms together and clamped Ning Ke's blade. Ning Ke lowered his head and continued to move forward in silence. The national master's face suddenly turned extremely pale. The wooden prayer beads hanging around his neck broke one by one at a speed visible to the naked eye. They turned into wood dregs and were blown away by the wind. This blood-sacrificing array was indeed marvelous. The array would be wherever the national master was. Even though they were dozens of miles apart, the arrays were still connected. Therefore, his whereabouts were hard to track as they reflected each other. But now, Yu Lian caught his blade in the west and Ning Ke slashed him in the east. The senior sister and junior brother from the academy used the simplest method to break his trap. Both sides were breaking the array. Which side should the national master defend? Defend both sides? Even if he had the killing soul of the entire Golden Tribe royal court, how could he defeat the attack from two powerful people like Yu Lian and Ning Ke? As the wooden prayer beads broke faster and faster, the national master's face became paler and paler. He felt that the power in Ning Ke's iron blade was endless and he did not know how long he could hold on. The young monk's face also became more and more pale by the dried-up stream in the west. He felt that the power coming from the blade was endless and he did not know how long Yu Lian could hold on. The young monk screamed in anger and pain. The machete in his hand trembled violently. Almost at the same time, dozens of miles away in the east, the old national master on the horse carriage also screamed unwillingly. The wooden prayer beads hanging suddenly broke and a terrifying aura shrouded the entire carriage array. The dozen or so high priests around the formation suddenly turned into a dozen or so blossoms of blood. Without any warning, a dozen or so high-level high priests died just like that. Moreover, he had died such a miserable death. The blood was like a fountain, spraying toward the array of carriages from all directions. Ning Ke did not know what was hidden in the blood, but he felt a little uneasy. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. A bloody rainstorm fell from the sky. All the blood of the 13 high priests was sucked out by the blood-sacrificing formation and finally sprinkled on the iron boxes in the air. Some of the blood seeped into the white skulls, and some fell on the ground, wetting the weeds and making them look like bloody dew. Ning Ke let out a muffled groan, and the crystal water droplet in his body suddenly burst open. Vast amounts of great spirit poured into his limbs, and then turned into Haotian's divine light, spreading out through countless pores. In an instant, his body began to burn, turning him into a flaming man. The blood rain that fell from the sky made sizzling sounds after falling into the flames. There were also faint ear-piercing screams and cries of pain, and there was even a faint burnt smell. Not a single drop of the high priest's blood fell on Ning Quebec. But he could not relax, because the national master in front of the blade suddenly became much stronger. The wrinkles on his face were flattening at a speed visible to the naked eye, and he looked 10 years younger in an instant. Could this be the strongest move of the blood-sacrificing formation? Ning Ke did not know that by the stream dozens of miles away in the west, the young monk had suddenly disappeared. The machete was deeply inserted into the dry and cracked ground. The national master used the lives of more than 10 high priests to do one thing, and that was to reunite the blood-sacrificing formation. In other words, the young monk had instantly returned to the field. This was the reason why Ning Ke saw that the national master had become younger quickly. Ning Ke did not know the reason, but he knew that he had to temporarily avoid it. The iron cutlass turned in the air and avoided the young national master's strong will. Without hesitation, he dragged the cutlass and drew something in the blood rain with his trembling right hand. The national master chose to return to the east instead of letting the old national master's soul return to the young monk's body. The reason was simple. In his eyes, Ning Ke was still not as scary as Yu Lian. He subconsciously wanted to avoid Yu Lian. The east and west were dozens of miles away, and he used the formation to return as fast as lightning. He believed that he would have enough time to kill Ning Ke before Yu Lian arrived, and then he could focus on dealing with Yu Lian. The young national master left the horse carriage, and with the flow of the chi of heaven and earth, he flew towards Ning Quebec. The lightness, the freedom. He was indeed a powerhouse from the grassland. His familiarity with the heaven and earth was far beyond the cultivators from the Central Plains, and Ning Ke could not compare. Ning Ke held the cutlass horizontally and flew backwards, but his speed was not as fast as the national master. But he was not afraid. He stared at the national master's eyes silently, and his wrist turned again. There was a soft sound. The young national master's face turned pale again, and there was a clear blood mark between his fingers. That was the talisman of two that Ning Ke wrote under the cover of the divine light. If the national master did not have the entire blood-sacrificing formation, his entire arm would have been broken. The national master was expressionless, and he flew forward again. Dozens of miles. The stream was only dozens of miles away, and Yu Lian would arrive in a moment. He had to be faster. However, it was a pity that he still underestimated Yu Lian's speed. In the sky full of dark clouds, a shrill howl suddenly sounded. A clear thin line cut through the entire layer of clouds, drawing from the west to the east, and ending at the battlefield full of flames. There was a loud bang. Yu Lian jumped down from the sky. This time, she did not walk over from the water, but really jumped down from the gray sky. The national master could not avoid it like how he dealt with Ning Ke previously, and could only take it head-on. It was as if a hammer had smashed on a giant bell. The entire grassland seemed to have heard the loud bang. In the broken carriage, between the iron boxes that were suspended in the air, there were strong qi flying everywhere, and there was blood everywhere. After a long time, the blood fog gradually disappeared, and the bell gradually quieted down. There were a few deep wrinkles at the corner of the national master's eyes. Under his feet was the cracked ground, behind him was the iron box that contained the white bones, and in front of him was Ning Ke, who was covered in divine light, and Yu Lian, who had her hands behind her back. There was silence, or perhaps she was adjusting her breath and resting. "I've lost." The national master looked at the academy's senior brother and junior sister, and smiled with some difficulty. He said, "Actually, I've lost the moment you saw through me. I never thought that I could defeat both of you at the same time." Yu Lian was expressionless, and she did not speak. Ning Ke was very calm. He said, "Then why don't you kill yourself? What are you doing? But it's still very difficult for you to kill me." The imperial preceptor squinted his eyes and looked at the 10 metal boxes floating in the air. He looked at the white human skulls in the boxes and said slowly, "I have already merged with this formation. If you can't break this formation, you won't be able to hurt my foundation. And the power of the human world can't break this formation." Ning Ke said, "There is no array in the world that can't be broken. Even if this array contains the killing power of the Golden Tribe for hundreds of years, when I mobilize more than 100,000 Tang soldiers, I can easily break it by spitting. But that needs time." The national master looked at him quietly and said. Yu Lian suddenly said, "I never like things that are too troublesome." Her yellow dress floated in the air, and she reached out to hit one of the iron boxes. Previously, when she jumped down from the sky, the Grand Tutor was covered in blood. At the same time, a crack appeared on the corner of the metal box. Now, as her petite palm landed, there was another terrifying sound that reverberated in the grassland. Boom! She slapped again. Boom! The national master's face became extremely pale. He sat cross-legged on the last horse carriage, and struggled to maintain the array. But Ning Ke did nothing. He put the iron cutlass back into the sheath, and walked under Yu Lian. He quietly watched what she was doing, as if he was enjoying a good show. Yu Lian slapped for the third time, and the crack on the iron box finally widened. The iron box that Ning Ke could not cut open with his iron cutlass with all his strength, and the iron box that was made of secret iron refined by the fire of the soul for a long time, was cracked by her small hand. The national master looked at Yu Lian and frowned. He said, "Do you really think that you can break my array with your physical strength? 23-year cicada cultivation, you think too highly of yourself." As expected, as he finished his words, the smell of blood came out from the depths of the white bones in the iron box, and then the crack on the iron box became smaller at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yu Lian frowned, and seemed to be a little displeased. Ning Ke looked up at her without saying anything. The wind on the grassland blew the hem of her dress. Yu Lian took a breath. The wind around the carriage formation was so strong that the yellow skirt was fluttering, and looked like a flag. She took a deep breath, causing her slightly curvy chest to heave up and down. Previously in the city of Wei, a Da's deep breath had sucked in half the air and the chi of heaven and earth in the street into his body. Yu Lian seemed to be sucking in all the chi of heaven and earth in the whole grassland into her body. She raised her small white hand again. Her hand fell on the iron box again. There was a loud buzzing sound. The broken pieces of the carriage were blown in all directions by the violent hurricane. Ning Ke groaned, and resisted the power by force. Blood flowed out from the ears of the national master. The violent sound wave spread far and wide, even hundreds of miles away. In front of Kaiping Market, the cavalries of both sides who were fighting desperately suddenly stopped waving their weapons, and covered their ears with their pale faces in pain. The war horses were even more pitiful, and fell to the ground in pain. Yu Lian's small face was also a little pale. But her expression was still like ice, transparent and indifferent. She reached out and patted the iron box again. With a cracking sound, the iron box was broken. The yellow skirt kept flashing above the wilderness. She hit more than 10 times, and the horrible sound wave spread around, and the iron boxes were broken. Countless white skulls fell to the ground with a rustle. A pure Haotian divine flame gushed out from Ning Ke's palm, and instantly burned those skulls to ashes. Those resentful souls that were imprisoned by the national master and the high priests finally got a real release. The blood sacrifice array was broken. The national master was covered with blood, and his pale and old face was full of blood and sweat. He looked at Yu Lian, and his eyes were full of confusion. He did not understand how she could break the blood sacrifice array that he had prepared for years with only her strength. "I don't think too highly of myself." Yu Lian returned to the ground, and walked to him with her hands behind her back. She looked down at him and said, "You are standing too low, and the power of the human world cannot break the array. You don't even know what is power." The wind on the grassland gently blew the yellow skirt. She was so small and thin, but so tall and big. She was a little girl, but also a great guru. The national master used the power of the whole clan to make the blood sacrifice array, and he even used the secret method of witchcraft to incarnate. But all of these were meaningless in front of her. No matter how magical witchcraft, Buddhist Dharma or Taoist canon was, it was no match for her power. She was the grandmaster of the devil's doctrine, famous for her mystery. She had disappeared in the cultivation world for 23 years, and no one knew that she had been practicing hairpin-style small regular script by the east window of the old library of the academy. That was because the headmaster wanted her to calm down. She calmed her mind and stopped thinking about other things. Conspiracies and Dharma access were no longer important. She cultivated herself to be extremely pure. Purity was in the mind, and purity was in the power. She returned to the origin of the cultivation of the devil's doctrine, and returned to the most correct path. So she became the most powerful person in the devil's doctrine for thousands of years. She was not immortal, but she could move mountains. She could even move a mountain, not to mention a few iron boxes. Salute to the bean, I don't think I have failed. The national master looked at the blood flowing like a waterfall on his body, and his old face suddenly showed the last bit of confidence. He looked at Yu Lian and Ning Ke and said, "At least I saved the last bloodline of the Golden Tribe." According to the time, this terrifying battle between the powerhouses in the north of the city of Wei had lasted for half a day. Chanyu and the Duoer cavalry might have run more than 100 miles away. It doesn't matter how far they run. Is it meaningful? Ning Ke looked at him and said, "You know very well that they will all die." At this moment, snow suddenly fell from the sky. Although the wilderness was much colder than the central plains, and there were times when it suddenly snowed at the end of spring, it was still warm around the city of Wei yesterday. Why did it suddenly snow now? Ning Ke looked up and found that it was the dark clouds that were summoned by the blood sacrifice array. Because they had blocked the sunlight for too long, the clouds below started to frost, and now it finally fell. The snow became heavier and heavier, and gradually became a blizzard. During the blizzard, it was the most difficult to track, unless it was a real powerhouse. The National Master thought that this was an opportunity for the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Because he had already guessed that Tang should be leading the desolate men to resist the counterattack of the divine halls of West Hill's cavalry in the eastern wilderness. Only Yu Lian from the academy came, and she should not be fighting again. "Look, it's snowing." He looked at the snowy sky and said with a smile, "This is the salt that Tingri sprinkled on the human world. It will protect his most devout followers and guide them out of the valley." Yu Lian looked up at the sky and slightly squinted her eyes. She said, "That girl always liked to add too much salt when she was cooking in the back of the mountain. Now that I think about it, it's really annoying." The National Master was slightly stunned, and then he understood what she was talking about. He could not help but sigh bitterly. As a devout follower of Haotian, it was really painful to talk to those who had lived with Haotian for a long time in the back of the mountain of the academy. Ada in the city of Wei was like that, and now his relatives were like that. The blizzard came very suddenly. In just a moment, the wilderness was covered with a thick layer of snow. The snow was so dazzling that it was hard to see the scenery in the distance. Suddenly, a soul-stirring roar came from the depths of the blizzard. It should be the roar of some kind of beast, but the sound was too loud. It seemed that the beast must be extremely huge to have a resonating cavity that could transmit the sound in all directions. The National Master looked into the blizzard and faintly saw many black shadows approaching slowly. Those black shadows were very tall, and each of them was like a small mountain. As the National Master of the Golden Tribe, he could naturally guess what was coming. His expression suddenly changed. Logically speaking, it was impossible for such a powerful beast to come to such a place in the south. The earth trembled slightly, and the snow was shaken until it became soft. Those hill-like black shadows slowly walked into the blizzard and came to the front of the three of them. It was a pack of snow wolves that appeared in the north of the city of Wei. A pack of snowfield dire wolves. Hundreds of snowfield dire wolves the size of small hills stood silently in the wasteland, like a snowy river. Compared to the time when they were forced to go to the south, the current snowfield dire wolves were obviously different. They were no longer thin and tired. Their once protruding shoulder blades were now covered by strong muscles and snow-white fur. It was all thanks to the guidance of the eldest brother that they could obtain a stable source of food in the wilderness that was close to the human settlements in the south. The National Master was a little confused. He did not understand why these terrifying and powerful creatures would appear here. The female wolf in the front had smooth and soft snow-white fur. Her expression was gentle, like a beautiful snowy mountain. On the back of the female wolf, there was an ordinary skinny male wolf. In front of the female wolf, there was a relatively smaller snow wolf. Judging from their expressions, these three should be a family. Looking at this scene, the National Master's expression became extremely interesting. Until today, he did not know that the leader of the snowfield dire wolves in the northern taiga forest turned out to be an ordinary male wolf. What happened next made him even more shocked and speechless. He saw that ordinary male wolf straightened his body and saluted Yu Lian and Ning Ke with hands folded in front like a human being. And Yu Lian and Ning Ke also saluted back seriously. The National Master remembered the black donkey and the tens of thousands of wild horses in the wilderness outside Guha a few days ago. He felt that the wind in the wilderness was getting colder. It had nothing to do with the falling snow or the blood loss. It was only related to these scenes. Did all of them belong to the academy? He suddenly felt that Chongqing was really unfair. Or maybe, Chongqing really could not do anything to the academy. Ning Ke whistled. The young snow wolf wagged its tail happily at him. But it did not run to him. Instead, it turned around with the big team of snow wolves and headed to the back of the blizzard. Since they were part of the academy, they naturally had to do something for the academy. Looking at the snow wolves disappearing in the blizzard, Ning Ke turned to the national master and said, "The golden tent will no longer exist after today." Chapter 1098. The national master lay in a pool of blood with a complicated expression. He was confused, desperate, and relieved. He could not change the fate of his own tribe, so he was no longer responsible. Perhaps immortality has truly abandoned us a long time ago. If Chanyu did not die, how could he have made such a mistake? The Golden Tribe has lost, but do you really want to kill us? He looked at Yu Lian and said tiredly, "Ning Ke and we have the city of Wei between us. What about you?" The hatred between the tribe and the desolate man was 1,000 years ago. Yu Lian did not say anything. The national master panted and said, "Don't forget that you desolate man used to enslave us for countless years. I don't think we owe you anything. You have no reason to do this. We want this grassland. We can give it to you. You can't afford it. We want it, the wolves want it, youngest uncle's donkey and his horse want it, and the millions of slaves that Jun Mo will bring out from the underground. There are too many people who want it." Yu Lian put her hands behind her back and looked at the grassland in the wind and snow. She thought of the desolate man's thousands of years of wandering. She said slowly without any extra emotion on her face, "What about us?" The national master was agitated and said angrily, "The Abbey Dean wants Haotian Taoism to perish, but do we not have the right to live? Do we have to die?" Yu Lian looked back at him as if she was puzzled by his question. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Of course you have the right to live. Everyone is born equal. As long as you come to this world, you have the right to live. Since that is the case, of course the strongest will live. You grew up in the wilderness, how can you not understand this? Have you ever seen a tiger or a wolf reasoning with a rabbit? If you don't want to be a rabbit, then learn to eat meat." This logic was very simple, very unreasonable, and very cold. The national master was silent for a long time and then murmured, "But we don't have to kill all of us, right? Just like 1,000 years ago, our tribe can continue to be the desolate man's slaves." He looked at Yu Lian with pleading eyes. Yu Lian looked at Ning Quebec. Ning Ke did not say anything and just looked into the wind and snow. "Our teacher taught us that slavery is a very wrong thing. It is wrong to enslave anyone, including aliens. So the desolate man will not keep you as slaves." Yu Lian said, "Then, I'll have to kill all of you." The nation master's last hope was shattered. He shook his head with a bitter smile and said, "If the headmaster knew that his student had twisted his words like this, would he die of anger?" Yu Lian looked up at the sky and remained silent for a long time. Then, she said expressionlessly, "He's already dead. If what we do can make him return to the human world out of anger, then we can do anything." Ning Ke also looked up at the sky. There were falling snow and dark clouds, but there was no moon. However, he still looked up at the sky with his senior sister. Then he remembered that he seemed to have said something similar. The disciples of the academy really hated their irresponsible teacher. Hate was not accurate, it should be said that they were annoyed, not annoyed, but annoyed. Ning Ke and Yu Lian were the most annoyed. All these years, Jun Mo had been fighting against the Buddhism sect in the western wilderness, and eldest brother had not been involved in the affairs of the academy. In fact, Yu Lian and Ning Ke had been handling the affairs of the academy. This was definitely not what the enemies of the academy wanted to see. The spring breeze blew, and the smell of blood gradually dissipated. The stream dozens of miles away in the west had already dried up, and the little oasis had also disappeared with the wind. No one knew where it had gone. The blood-sacrificing array had become a ruin made of the broken walls of the carriage. Countless ghastly human bones had been purified by Haotian's divine flame. The nation master finally closed his eyes. Yu Lian looked at Ning Ke and said, "I'm going to recuperate. The rest is up to you." In the previous battle, she had fought against the killing souls of the entire Golden Tribe royal court alone. Although she had Ning Kei's help, she still suffered an unimaginable impact. Even if she won, she had paid a great price. Ning Kei thought of the most troublesome part of the plan and said, "I'll wait for you at Peach Mountain." Yu Lian turned around and walked into the depths of the grassland. Suddenly, she thought of something and stopped. She asked, "When I was floating in the air, did you keep looking up at my skirt?" Ning Kei answered with a smile, "Senior sister, you did a good job." Yu Lian did not bother to answer him. She shook her body and disappeared into the depths of the grassland. Ning Kei shook his head and put his iron cutlass back into the sheath. Hearing the dense hoofbeats behind him, he turned around and saw the smoke and dust around the city of Wei. Su Qi led the cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army to kill all the grassland cavalrymen who were left behind to intercept them. They had started to chase the fleeing Golden Tribe royal court. With hundreds of snowfield direwolves leading the cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army, Ning Kei was not worried at all even though Tang was pinned down in the eastern wilderness by Long Qing and the cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill. The Golden Tribe royal court was already at its end. The smoke and dust were flying in the wilderness to the north of the city of Wei. The hoofbeats were resounding. Thousands of cavalrymen of the Tang Empire chased deep into the grassland to bury Chanyu. Ning Kei watched the scene quietly until the wilderness became quiet again. Then he turned around and walked toward the city of Wei. The snow had stopped and the dark clouds were gradually dispersing. The spring sunshine on the grassland was very bright. The old yellow city actually had a fresh smell. Maybe it was because of the hundreds of weeds growing in the mud wall in front of the city gate. Those stubborn weeds were the biggest enemy of the rammed mud wall. It was strange that no matter what was mixed in the mud, no matter how hard it was hammered, those weeds could not be stopped from taking root and sprouting again. Ning Kei remembered clearly that when he was in the city of Wei, all the soldiers and civilians in the city would go around to remove weeds under the leadership of General Ma to prevent the city wall from being damaged. The city of Wei had been in the hands of the grassland barbarians these years. They did not care about the city wall being damaged. After a few years, those weeds came back to life, as if they were laughing at the futile work of the Tangs. The blood in the city had been gradually absorbed by the yellow sand. The grassland barbarians' corpses and collapsed buildings were everywhere. The Tang army in charge of logistics was cleaning the battlefield. No one noticed Ning Quebec. He walked through the old city and looked at the familiar streets and buildings. He thought of the familiar people and things. It was as if he could still smell the smell of wine and roasted chicken. He did not enter the tavern, nor did he enter General Ma's house. He did not enter any other place because he knew that those places had long since been deserted. The small courtyard beside the stream in the remote part of the city was still there. It was his and Sangsang's small courtyard. There was a hunting knife sticking out of the wall of the small courtyard. It was the one he did not take away. He looked at the hunting knife and was silent for a while. Then he pushed the door and walked into the room. Looking at the bedding left by the grassland barbarians, he frowned in disgust and threw all those things on the ground in the courtyard, ready to burn them later. He found the bamboo chair and moved it to the field. He lay down and closed his eyes. The bright sunlight stung his eyes through his eyelids. He felt a little sore, so he closed his eyes tighter and lay in silence until he was about to fall asleep. After a long time, he woke up. He opened his eyes and looked at the familiar small courtyard where he had lived for many years. He stretched out his hand in the air as he had done in the past. Unfortunately, there was no teapot. Just like now, when he raised his face, there would not be a warm wet towel placed on it. If he said it was hot, there would not be a pair of cold, white feet in his arms. If he said he was hungry, there would not be a bowl of noodles with fried eggs. The city of Wei was still there. The tavern was still there. The small courtyard was still there. The brick bed was still there. The box on the opposite side of the brick bed was still there. The courtyard wall was still there. The hunting knife hidden in the wall was still there. The silver notes were still in his arms. But she was no longer here. Everyone was no longer here. She was no longer here. Ning Ke lay on the bamboo chair and looked at the blue sky. He was thinking about many things. Before he left the city of Wei, he told General Ma, "Don't grow old and don't die. Wait for me to show my filial piety." When he left the city of Wei, he told all the men in the city that if he could not make a name for himself, he would not come back. Now he had reached the top position in the world. He finally had the face to come back, but it was too late. The war between the Golden Tribe Royal Court and the Tang Empire was destined to change the situation of the world. But for him, this war was actually another thing. It had nothing to do with the world. It was only related to the city of Wei. He wanted to take back the city of Wei. He wanted to avenge the city of Wei. At the same time, he wanted to find someone in the city of Wei. Time passed slowly on the bamboo chair. Several days later, the sound of hooves came from the stream opposite the small courtyard. It gradually slowed down, followed by the sound of a password. Situelan nodded slightly and responded to the salute of the Tang army. She walked to the tent opposite the small courtyard and handed the horse to a soldier. Then she looked at the small courtyard and asked, "What did he say?" A general shook his head and said, "He insisted." After a moment of silence, Situelan asked, "How many captives?" The general said, "There are some small battles around the 7 stockade villages. But the situation is basically under control. If you include the slaves, women and children, there are at least more than 400,000 people." Situelan slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "Even so, he still insisted?" The general did not say anything. It seemed that he did not have much opinion on the insistence of the people in the courtyard. Situelan looked at the small courtyard not far away. After a moment of silence, she walked over. "This is a massacre." She looked at Ning Ke on the bamboo chair and said. She was calm, but her voice was slightly trembling. Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked at her. He said, "You have been in the army for many years. Haven't you seen a massacre?" Situelan was silent for a long time and said, "According to the rule, as long as the woman is not dead, she will not die. Even the most barbaric tribe on the grassland will do the same. This is the courtyard where she and I lived many years ago. We have lived here for many years." Ning Ke stood up from the bamboo chair and pointed to the small courtyard. Then he motioned her to follow him out of the courtyard and walked to the street in the city. He began to introduce to her every brick, stone, grass and wood in the city of Wei. "The people in this city are all people I know. They all died that year." The grassland people broke through the city gate and broke into the city. They held machetes and killed anyone they saw. At that time, did they distinguish between men and women and tall or short? Walking out of the city gate, he stood on the meadow and looked at the glaring weeds on the mud wall of the city of Wei. He shook his head and said, "I don't want this kind of thing to strengthen my determination and convince you and other Tang generals. I just want to tell you where my determination comes from. No one can stop me from taking revenge." Situelan followed his eyes and looked at the city of Wei. Thinking of her comrades and clansmen who died in the frontier fortress these years, she struggled and said hesitantly, "But the academy doesn't teach like this. As I said, no one can stop my revenge, even if the headmaster of academy comes back." Ning Ke looked at the bright moon that had just appeared in the depth of the sunset and said after a long time of silence. Finally, he pointed to the dozens of weeds on the wall of the city of Wei and said, "Maybe this is a serious sin, but I don't care. I only know that we must remove the roots when we cut the weeds. Otherwise, we will be in trouble." A few days later, the whole grassland was soaked with the blood of the grassland people. In this war, the Tang people who won firmly carried out Ning K's will just like they did outside Guha. They did not leave any captives and naturally did not leave any trouble. But the machetes of the Tang army became a little blunt. Ning Ke and Situelan came to the meadow outside the city of Wei again. The Tang army gathered in the wilderness looked at the two figures on the meadow with complicated emotions in their eyes. Those emotions were fanatical worship, but also cold awe. As a fierce army, the tens of thousands of cavalrymen outside the city of Wei had killed many people. They had also seen the horrible scene of the so-called massacre on the grassland. But they had never seen people kill like this. The whole grassland seemed to be watered by blood. There was a pungent smell of blood everywhere. The mosquitoes and flies smelled the smell and made a numbing buzzing sound. If not for the tactical array master, the Tang army would not be able to stay here. However, the tactical array could keep the mosquitoes and flies away and dilute the smell of blood, but it could not block the sight. Dozens of miles north of the city of Wei, on the flat wilderness, there was a hill. Because it was too far away, they could not see clearly. The hill was shining in the morning light. The Tang army all knew what that hill was. Every time they looked at the hill, they would feel a little cold. That was a hill piled up with the heads of the grassland people. Ning Ke stood on the meadow and looked at the hill of human heads in the distance. He looked very calm. There was no fear, and no abnormal fanaticism. For him, it was just something that he had to do. Chapter 1099. Situelan sighed in her heart and said goodbye to him. She led her horse and walked down the meadow. The battle in the 7 stockade villages had ended and the cleanup of the battlefield was basically completed. Now she was going to lead the cavalry into the grassland and follow Su Chi's footsteps to make the final attack on the Golden Tribe. The war was over, but the killing had just begun. She hoped that the world would not give Ning Ke such a chance again, but she had to continue killing. She led her horse to the meadow and could not help but look back. She saw the sun was rising and Ning Ke was standing in it. The edge of his body was glowing with a golden light, looking somewhat sacred. If she had the chance to see the scene of Yi Su becoming a sage in the capital of the Kingdom of Song, she might have linked the two together. However, Ning Ke was different from Yi Su. He stood in the light and became a shadow. He was a little dim and not easy to see clearly. Situelan suddenly sympathized with him. Hundreds of thousands of people died because of his words, but he was so calm and indifferent. Because he did not find Sang Sang, he had no love or hate for the world. This kind of person was naturally the most terrible, but also the most pitiful. What was he living for? The Tang army set off and the city of Wei became quiet again. Without the isolation of array masters, the terrifying buzzing of countless mosquitoes and flies reverberated between heaven and earth like thunder. Occasionally, dark clouds would cover the sun, and under the clouds, hundreds of vultures would fly over while letting out unpleasant cries. Ning Ke did not care about these. He had never seen so many corpses and blood in his life. But he had seen too many horrible scenes like this, so many that he was tired of it. He walked into the wilderness that was filled with the smell of blood. He looked down at the weeds that had been congealed by blood and the soil that had been congealed by blood. He pondered as he walked until he arrived in front of the human head mountain. He was pondering, not sighing, but carefully feeling the aura. The powerful blood-sacrificing array of the national master of the Golden Tribe gave him some hints. It turned out that the power of the human world not only came from the living, but also from the dead. What should he do if he wanted to use this power? Many footprints were left on the blood-soaked plains. Amidst the slapping sounds, the footprints accumulated a shallow amount of blood, a strong fishy smell, and a lot of resentment, until it formed a clear mark. Ning Ke walked in the wilderness for 3 days and left many footprints. If someone were to sit on the clouds and look down at the grassland, he would see a very complicated pattern, with the city of Wei as the center, the human head mountain as the Achilles heel, the dozens of miles of blood-stained wilderness as the curtain, and his footprints as the lines. It was so complicated that it was hard to imagine. This pattern was an extremely complicated array, or in other words, an extremely large talisman. Then he left the city of Wei and went to Kaiping. This time, he observed for a shorter period of time. He only walked for a day because he had become much more familiar with it. After that, he went to Chu City and went through all the 7 strongholds. As a result, there was an extremely complicated blood formation outside each stronghold. If the person looking down from the sky had flown a little higher, he should have been able to see that these 7 complicated blood formations were like 7 ink dots that formed a straight line. The line was sloppy and random. It did not look like a complete stroke, but more like the beginning of a stroke. The 7 extremely complicated formations were just ink dots. The straight line formed by the 7 formations was just the beginning of a stroke. Then how long would this stroke be if it was completed? How magnificent would it be? Before Ning Ke wrote this stroke, no one would ever know. After arranging the 7 formations, Ning Ke returned to the city of Wei. It was still quiet in the city of Wei. Only the big black horse and the broken sedan were waiting for him. The big black horse walked to him without showing any joy of reunion, because it clearly felt Ning Ke's exhaustion and sensed his true thoughts, so it lowered its head. Ning Ke reached out and gently stroked its neck. It was not that he was comforting it, but that it was comforting him in this way. Countless grassland people were killed, and their blood watered the grassland. Everything, including all the sins and notoriety, was just to write that stroke, to relieve his greatest uneasiness. That faint fear and uneasiness were like whips that constantly whipped his body, causing waves of sharp pain in the depths of his soul, causing him to become more and more anxious. He was in a hurry to leave the city of Wei and head south, because he could not find her in the city of Wei. I can't find her. The Abbey Dean, eldest brother, and the drunkard probably haven't found her either. But I have to find her, so I want to ask for your help. Ning Ke looked at the black donkey in the broken sedan and earnestly asked for help. The black donkey was silent for a while, subconsciously scratching the grapes on the plate with its front hooves. Even though it was arrogant and lazy, it was clear about the importance of this matter. Its former master was killed by her. An unpleasant quacking sound resounded in the field outside the city of Wei. Ning Ke finally felt a little relieved after getting the promise from the black donkey. He turned over and rode on the big black horse. He gently squeezed the horse's abdomen, and with a cheerful neigh, black lightning reappeared between the heaven and the earth. A straight line appeared on the field, pointing straight to the south. The heaven and the earth were the grassland, and he was the wild horse, constantly searching. Compared to the war in the northern grassland, the central plains was not peaceful either. Flames of war were raging everywhere. The cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill led by Long Qing, with the full cooperation of the Yen Kingdom, fought against the Tang army from the north camp and went deep into the wilderness, helping the remaining forces of the Left Tent Palace to fight against the desolate. After the divine halls of West Hill completely controlled the South Jin Kingdom, they ordered the army of the South Jin Kingdom to divide into 2 groups. Zhao Nanhai led the cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill and the mighty army of the South Jin Kingdom, preparing to attack the Great River Kingdom on the other side of the river. The wind on both sides of the river became sharper. The old members of the Divine Hall of Judgment who were loyal to Yi Hongyu carried out bloody assassinations in the Divine Halls of West Hill and the South Jin Kingdom, trying to slow down the coalition army's march to the south. The real bloody battles did not take place on these battlefields, but in many inconspicuous places, such as an inconspicuous small county, a dilapidated Taoist temple in a town, a fishing village by the sea, or an iron mine by the Fujian River in Qinghe Prefecture. These were the places where people died the most. This was because the spread of the new stream was rooted in poverty and anger, so it naturally started from these places. The divine halls of West Hill's suppression of the new stream was naturally carried out in these places. After Yi Su's death, the new stream was severely suppressed. But it did not take long before it regained its life with the secret support of the Tang Empire. It even felt like it was reborn from the fire. Chen Pipi had left Chang'an a long time ago. He inherited his senior brother's will and preached everywhere. He silently and firmly carried out the established policy, vowing to overthrow the old Taoism's rule over the world. The disciples hidden in different places accepted Chen Pipi's leadership without any hesitation. They respected their master Yi Su as a saint and Chen Pipi as the pope. They began to launch an all-out attack on the old world. The spread of the new stream was in full swing in the human world. The suppression of the new stream by the divine halls of West Hill was as heavy as the mountains and the sea. They did not bestow any divine grace upon the new stream. There was a building in the government office of a small county that had been burnt black. It was said that it was set on fire by the thugs of the new stream a few days ago. But the fire was a bit strange. It had not rained for many days and the air was extremely dry, but the fire did not spread. It only burned down a remote wing, where a pregnant maidservant lived. The two banks of the Fujian River were also shrouded in terror. Corpses hung from the beautiful bridges. Fresh blood and indescribable fluids flowed down from those stiff feet and into the river and creek. The once incomparably clear water that had nourished the people of Qin River for countless years had already turned the color of blood and was extremely pungent. The beautiful and tranquil Qinghe prefecture had become like this. The once bustling Yangzhou city was now filled with dead silence and depressing silence. Those nobles who could not forget their homeland from 1,000 years ago and wanted to leave the Tang Empire, would they regret their decision when they saw the current scene? Even if they did, there was nothing they could do. Qinghe prefecture had been completely controlled by the cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill and the army of the South Jin Kingdom. Especially after Henmu Liren showed his ruthlessness and unimaginable power, nobody dared to betray him. A sacred sedan was moving slowly on the straight street in the city of Yangzhou. It stopped in front of the tranquil lake. Everyone who saw the sedan knelt down to show their reverence for Haotian. In the streets further away, more people closed their doors and windows as fast as they could, for fear of being seen. Henmu Liren stood calmly in layers of gauze. His childish face was filled with innocence. Even when he saw the dead bodies of the sinners pierced through by the wooden stakes, he remained calm. He did not care about the bloody scene at all. Because he was the one who created it. He thought that since he was the son of Haotian, he had the right to rule the world. Anyone who dared to go against his will should die. The wind blew gently and the gauze swayed slightly. The faint scent of flowers mixed with the faint smell of blood passed through the gauze and reached his nose. He took a deep breath. He looked innocent and intoxicated, so he looked cruel. Maybe it was because of the chilly wind, or because he took a deep breath, he suddenly coughed. His pale face flushed and he seemed to be in pain. Have a good day at work tomorrow. Chapter 1100. Henmu Liren raised his eyebrows. He thought of something and was no longer as calm and joyful as before. His face was distorted and he was extremely angry, especially when he looked down. The divine robe he wore was very loose, and he could easily see his own chest when he lowered his head. Even though he was the son of Haotian, he was still a mortal in the human world. That was why he had two breasts on his chest. But now he seemed to have another one, a black chess piece. This black chess piece, deeply embedded in his flesh, made him feel very disgusted. I'm going to kill you. Henmu Liren growled, I'm going to kill you. His clear and sharp voice echoed on the surface of the lake. The cavalrymen of the divine halls and a dozen red-robed divine priests knelt down in fear and did not dare to make a sound. Henmu Liren was really angry. He thought he should have killed his way into Chang'an or at least outside the city. Who could have thought that he was still in Qinghe Prefecture? He had powerful subordinates, cavalrymen of the divine halls and 100,000 soldiers. But he was stopped by the Tangs in the south of the verdant canyon. It was the verdant canyon again. It was just like years ago. Hunmu Liren once sighed with regret. Jun Mo lost his arm and he could no longer defend the verdant canyon alone. He also missed the chance to defeat the most powerful Jun Mo. Now Jun Mo was in the West Wilderness. Mr. First, Yu Lian, Chen Pipi and Ning Ke were not here. But he was still stopped by the south of the verdant canyon. On the fields in the north of Qinghe Prefecture, the Divine Hall's coalition army of West Hill and the southern army of Tang had been fighting for dozens of days. Both sides had their own victories and defeats. Hunmu finally joined the battle himself, but he was ambushed by the academy and was badly injured. Those sighs seemed to have become slaps on his face. Every time Hunmu thought of it, he would feel pain on his face and then he would go crazy in extreme pain. How could a few ants in the see-through state stop me? Hunmu Liren lowered his head and looked at the black chess piece. His slightly twisted eyebrows were full of disgust. His voice came from his teeth and was extremely cold. He closed his eyes and took another deep breath. The gauze around the divine sedan began to dance crazily. The wind blew and the air above the lake was all sucked into his chest. His chest rose slightly, and his divine robe fluttered in the wind. This time, he did not cough. A power that did not belong to the human world came to the human world and entered his body. With a muffled thud, the black chess piece embedded in his chest instantly shattered into countless pieces. He opened his eyes and looked in the direction of the verdant canyon. There was only killing intent in his eyes. His injuries had healed, so it was time for those people to die. Ever since the rebellion in Qinghe County, the verdant canyon had become the Real National Gate for the Tang Empire and the Academy. Because the South had all belonged to Taoism, it was a place that had to be guarded. A few years ago, when the whole world attacked the Tang Empire used a trick that had been hidden for hundreds of years. Professor Huang He and the array tactical master of the Imperial Court worked together to activate the big array in the verdant canyon at the cost of their own cultivation, directly burying countless enemies and powerhouses. In the following years, the Tang Empire began to reopen the road in the verdant canyon. Sealing the verdant canyon might be a simple way to keep the enemy outside the national gate. But what the Tang Empire wanted to do was to fight their way out of the verdant canyon, defeat all the enemies, and recover the lost land. However, under the pressure of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, especially the threat of Hunmu Liren, the Southern Battlefront Army and the Yulin Royal Guards who were guarding the throat of the Tang Empire in the south did not make any arrangements for the south. They silently guarded the verdant canyon, using the terrain and distance as weapons to keep the powerful enemies outside the verdant canyon. The Tang army was a bit tired after fighting for dozens of days. The barracks hidden deep in the canyon became quieter. Only one barracks was a bit special. It was already late at night, but it was still very lively. Someone was quarreling. As I said before, I am definitely the best chess player in the world. Younger brother, how can you be my opponent? But you just won't admit defeat. You've been playing with me for so many years. Aren't you tired? Senior brother, if you were talking about something else, would have tolerated it. However, I definitely won't tolerate this kind of thing. We've clearly played 492 games of chess over the years, and I've won one more than you. Why am I not a match for you? That game is triplet disaster. How can I lose? According to the rules I've learned since I was a child, I win and you lose. Bah. Anyway, you're not as good as me in chess. Why? Because Henmu broke into the chess array by mistake a few days ago. It was my black chess piece that hurt him. Not your white chess piece. If it weren't for my white chess piece, how could I trap him? What about the previous years? Don't forget that I was the one who blocked Xiong Chumo. Bah. If it weren't for third sister, you would have been dead. In the dim barracks, Su Jialuan lowered his head and concentrated on decocting the medicine, as if he did not hear the conversation. He was tired of listening to these people quarreling these days. The fifth brother of the academy, Song Qian, looked at the stubborn eighth brother and could not control his anger. Unexpectedly, there were two more angry voices coming from the side. Beigong Weiyang raised his bandaged hand, as if he was showing off or demonstrating. He shouted, "If it weren't for me blocking the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, your stupid array would have been broken. How could you trap Hunmu? And me? Don't forget me." Shimen Buhua also raised his bandaged hand to remind them. Then he looked at the fifth brother and the eighth brother and sneered, "Don't forget that this is the second time we've guarded the Verdant Canyon. In terms of rank, you're ahead of us. In terms of contribution, don't even think about being ahead of us." No one would listen to him, especially when he said it so harshly that it aroused the competitiveness of the senior brothers. For a moment, the barracks was filled with spittle and dirty words. It was so noisy. All right. Stop quarreling. Take your medicine first." Wang Qi walked over and stopped the four from continuing to be childish. Only when the lights were brighter could they see clearly that the four of them were lying on the bed, their bodies wrapped in bandages. The smell of medicine and blood was everywhere. It was unknown how severe their injuries were, but it was obvious that they no longer had the strength to fight. After drinking the smelly medicine made by the junior brother, the room became much quieter. After a long time, Beigong Weiyang suddenly asked, "11th, can your poison stop Hengmu?" It was quiet again for a long time. Wang Qi shook his head. "I've never heard that a grand cultivator who had surpassed the 5 states could be poisoned to death." Song Qian's expression was a little indifferent. "Hengmu has surpassed the 5 states. If he hadn't underestimated us, no one would have been able to stop him with the help of the remaining array in tent in the Verdant Canyon." The atmosphere in the room became much more depressing. The previous excitement and the recent excitement all came from their complacency. They were very complacent. A grand cultivator like Hengmu, who had surpassed the 5 states, was defeated by them. However, Hengmu's injury would eventually recover. What should they do next? The situation of the war had changed. Hengmu could not step into the same river. Who could stop such a powerful cultivator? If they could not stop him, how could the Tang Empire defend this country? Wang Qi suddenly said softly, looking at the days, "The things in the north should be over." Shimen Buhua frowned and said, "Although senior sister had planned this, the Golden Tribe is so powerful. How could they be defeated in such a short time? I don't have much hope. I don't care." Beigong Weiyang was a little annoyed and said, "For useless cripples and 11th, the flower addict. How can we fight them? If Ning Ke doesn't come, I won't care anymore." Wang Qi was a little unhappy and said, "The flower addict is a woman. Senior brother, don't talk nonsense." Shimen Buhua was a little unhappy and said, "How can you throw everything to youngest brother?" Beigong Weiyang covered his head with the quilt and said in a low voice, "I want to throw it to eldest brother, second brother, and third sister, but they have to come. Anyway, I can't beat Hengmu." The oil lamp dimmed again because of this sentence. In the ambush of the Verdant Canyon, the 4 disciples of the academy had used all their skills and used the array in tent left by their predecessors. They had all the advantages, but they could only hurt Hengmu and were seriously injured. If Hengmu did not underestimate them, if they did not have those conditions, they could not think of any way to defeat him. Every time they thought of the scene where Hengmu broke the array by force with his majestic power, they would be silent and vigilant. Then they would feel uneasy and fearful. Su Jialuan finished the second batch of medicine and walked to the bedside. He gently pulled the corner of the quilt. The little attendant had become a real young man with delicate features. Beigong Weiyang lifted the quilt and was a little annoyed. He said, what's the use of drinking medicine every day? What's the use of not drinking medicine? Su Jialuan looked at him and said seriously, young master said that if nothing works, then do you still do it or not? Of course you still have to do it, because it's only possible if you do it. It's impossible if you don't do it. The room suddenly became quiet. The previously oppressive and even somewhat despairing atmosphere was immediately diluted by these words. With the help of Wang Qi, Beigong Weiyang sat up with difficulty. He took the bowl of medicine and gulped it down. Song Qian and the other two also drank the medicine as fast as they could. They had to recover as soon as possible. Even if they could not beat Hengmu, they had to use more strength to make Hengmu use more strength. In the early morning, the mist gradually dissipated and the morning light shone on the verdant canyon. A horse came from the north. In the quiet valley, the sound of hooves was very clear. The Tang soldiers on duty at night peeped out from behind the seemingly simple but actually strong arrow mounds. They did not draw their bows vigilantly, because they could see clearly that the horse came from the north. The horse was in black, and the people were also dressed in black. They were Ning Ke and the big black horse. Ning Ke's black academy uniform was full of dust. The big black horse's fat, which had been raised in the quagmire for several years, quickly disappeared in the galloping of thousands of miles. Now it looked especially strong and tired. From the city of Wei to the verdant canyon, thousands of miles away, he and the big black horse did not really rest. They only took a nap after drinking a pot of porridge when they passed by Yang Erxi's house. As time went by, the academy was no longer a mysterious place that connected the world with the outside world. Through the propaganda of the imperial court and the narration of blabbermouths like Beigong in the military camp, the image of Ning Ke, his weapons, and his horse were all discussed enthusiastically by the Tangs. At this time, looking at the obviously extraordinary big black horse in the valley and looking at the iron arrows and knives on his body, someone quickly guessed his identity and quickly spread the news. On both sides of the verdant valley, behind the hidden arrow mounds, more and more Tang soldiers stood up and looked at Ning Ke in the valley. Some of them got up in a hurry and kept rubbing their eyes and yawning. Mr. 13 finally arrived. On the steep cliff, the voices of the Tang army gradually gathered together and turned into excited cheers. Along the way, tens of thousands of the Yulin Royal Guards and the Southern Battlefront Army cheered sincerely, and some brave soldiers greeted loudly. Ning Ke looked up at both sides of the valley and smiled and waved to say hello. So the cheers and cheers in the verdant canyon suddenly became louder, as if they were going to break through the morning sky and shake Haotian's divine kingdom. Finally, they reached the exit of the verdant canyon. Ning Ke pulled the reins and the big black horse stopped moving forward. The verdant canyon narrowed into a gap that was several feet wide. Looking out from the gorge, one could see the fertile fields in the north of Qinghe Prefecture. It was late spring and early summer, and everything was green as far as the eye could see. There were many old and fresh traces of war inside and outside the canyon. There were a lot of black blood stains, broken arrows, and dense arrow scratches on the exposed stone walls, indicating the intensity of the battle. This was the gate of the Tang Empire. The war a few years ago and the war this year, the battlefield that determined the safety of Chang'an, had always been here, in the verdant canyon. Ning Ke had entered the verdant canyon several times, and today he came again. He stood in the canyon and looked out. No one knew what he was thinking. Wang Jinglu appeared beside him and looked to the south with him. Wang Jinglu looked very serious and did not try to hide the killing intent in his eyes. You must kill Hengmu. Ning Ke was silent for a moment and then said, of course. After being driven out of Chang'an by Master Yen Sei and joining the army to follow Su Shi, Wang Jinglu had lost a lot of weight. Now he was even thinner and looked like a withered branch, which surprised Ning Quebec. You have already broken the threshold of the knowing destiny state. Why? Wang Jinglu thought of the massacre in Qinghe Prefecture that night. He thought of the brave young men from the clans he had worked hard to gather, but before they had time to mature, they became fruits falling from the branches and smashed into pieces. His face became a little ugly, and he said, "Grief makes people mature, and also makes people afraid." Ning Kai turned to look at him and asked, "Are you afraid?" "Yes." Wang Jinglu was silent for a moment and said, "You have never met Hengmu, so you don't know how powerful he is." "I know, so I am very afraid." Ning Kai looked to the south again and said with a smile, "And you want me to kill him?" "It has been very hard recently. I will tell you the reason in a few days. I am in good health. It is purely because of work that my butt hurts from sitting. The massage in the afternoon was not very good. I will feel much better after my wife comes to beat me next week." "Ha ha ha, I am so cheap. Anyone who is not satisfied can come and beat me." Chapter 1101. Wang Jinglu said, "Though he's powerful, I can help you locate him. Just like what we've discussed before, you can shoot him. If you can't kill him with one arrow, shoot a few more." Ning Kai shook his head and said, "You'll die." "I'm not afraid of death. I should have died when Master Yen Sei wrote the well talisman in Chang'an. I should have died when Xiong Chumo killed General Su Shi. I should have died when the entire Qinghe prefecture was bathed in blood that night." Wang Jinglu looked to the south and said, "As long as I can kill him, I can die many times." Ning Kai was silent for a while and said, "He's not worth it." After saying this, he got off the horse and let go of the reins to let the big black horse rest. Then he followed Wang Jinglu to a military post deep in the side of the gorge. Walking into the barracks, before he had the time to greet his 5 senior brothers, he was greeted by a burst of mournful cries. Beigong Weiyang pointed at him with a trembling finger. His lips were also trembling. He cried in grief and anger, "Why did you come so late? Why did you come so late?" It was painful to cry without a voice. He said it so clearly, but there were no tears on his face. Of course, he was faking it. Ning Kai said angrily, "My butt almost split into 2 halves, and you think it's not fast enough?" Beigong Weiyang was seen through by him, but he was not embarrassed at all. He scolded angrily, "You guys who only know how to fight, just play in the north and west. Most importantly, you leave this place to us scholars. You're so shameless. Anyway, I don't care. We've suffered a great loss. You have to avenge us." Ning Kai looked at his 4 senior brothers who were seriously injured in bed and said helplessly, "How do you want to avenge us?" Before Beigong said anything, 5th brother Song Qian said coldly, "Of course we have to kill him." Ning Kai glanced at Wang Jinglu subconsciously and asked confusedly, "The military summary I received said that my senior brothers performed well on the battlefield and successfully killed Hengmu. Why do I feel that you guys suffered a loss?" Beigong Weiyang said angrily, "You and 3rd sister were the ones who designed the array and the plan. Don't you know the details? But even so, we didn't manage to kill him. Instead, we were beaten into a pig's head. No matter how you look at it, it's a disgrace to the academy. Of course, we suffered a great loss. Little brother, you must get back at us." Ning Kai took the ginseng soup from Wang Qi and drank it in one gulp. Suddenly, he felt much more energetic. He took the hot towel from Su Jiaoluan and wiped his face. He looked at the crowd and asked, "Wang Jinglu said that he wanted to kill him, and now senior brothers also say that they want to kill him. Of course, we will kill him, but why are you so obsessed with him? Moreover, it's fine to kill him, but you also said that he's not easy to kill. What are you trying to say?" Beigong Weiyang praised, "Although the rhyme is extremely boring, it is still rhyming." Ning Kai ignored him and threw the towel back to Su Jiaoluan. He said, "Boost the morale of others and diminish our own. What exactly do you want to do? Can you just say it?" Song Qian was the highest in the room. Everyone looked at him. He said seriously, I'm saying this to remind you to be careful. Hunmu is too strong. Maybe we should defend for a while. The verdant canyon is naturally easy to defend. With our tactical array and poison, we should be able to hold on until senior brother arrives. He suddenly thought of something very important. What about senior sister? She's injured and needs some time to recover. Ning Ke said, as for defending, I don't agree. This is not the original plan. Senior sister won't agree either. The Golden Tribe Royal Court is indeed powerful. Senior sister is indeed injured. If she came with you, I would have no objection. We should attack Yangzhou, but not now. Why not? We have to go south eventually. Seeing that Ning Ke did not change his mind, Beigong Weiyang clapped his hands and laughed. He said, I knew that little brother wouldn't agree. We still have to solve the problem of killing Hunmu. Ning Ke said, I have never opposed this. Song Qian said, the key is how to kill him. Now it seems that the most reliable and safest way is to use the primordial 13 arrows and let Wang Jinglu be the bait. Wang Jinglu took a step forward with a smile on his face. Song Qian stood up with the help of Wang Qi and walked to Ning Quebec. He said, if Wang Jinglu can't do it, then it's our turn. We'll use the tactical array to force him to show his state. Ning Ke was silent for a long time. He said, you've been talking about how powerful Hunmu is. Are you trying to convince me to accept your arrangement? Song Qian was as thick-skinned as all the people in the back of the mountain of the academy. He said calmly, Hunmu is powerful. Our arrangement is not bad either. Beigong Weiyang saw that the atmosphere was a little depressing. He praised again, the rhyme is also very accurate. Ning Ke did not think and said directly, I don't agree. Song Qian and the other brothers looked at each other and sighed, we are worried that you won't agree. That's why we put on this show. Why can't you understand our intention? Beigong Weiyang was about to say something when Ning Ke glared at him and said, I don't care if it's rhyme or not. If I don't agree, I don't agree. I don't agree to guard, and I don't agree to exchange your lives for Hunmu's. He looked at Wang Jinglu and said, as I said just now, he doesn't deserve it. Everyone was silent. They did not know what to do since their well-planned advertising campaign did not work. Song Qian asked worriedly, then how do we kill Hunmu? Ning Ke said, how do we kill a person? Of course, we kill him. It sounded like nonsense, but it was still nonsense when one thought about it. However, it was often this kind of nonsense that represented the absolute truth in the world. For example, how to love a person. Of course, it was to love her, he has already surpassed the 5 states. Song Qian thought of the majestic power that fell from the sky that day. His expression became more and more serious. He looked at Ning Ke and said, I know you are good at fighting. But how do you make up for the gap between states? The Abbey Dean has entered a state of tranquility. For thousands of years, only the headmaster and uncle master are stronger than him. However, eldest brother and third sister can fight him together. I can use Chang and to cut him into a coma. Lotus is on the threshold of the 5 states. His state is mysterious and unpredictable. Shanshan, Yi Hongyu, and I are at the beginning of knowing destiny state, the upper part of see-through state, and the last one is at the beginning of see-through state. However, we can defeat him and turn him into ashes. Cultivators are chopped into minced meat by ordinary people. Masters are beaten into dust by ordinary people. I shot Longqing into an idiot with 1 arrow. The headmaster has gone to the divine kingdom to fight with Haotian until now. Fighting is related to states, but it also has nothing to do with them. Do we really need to make up for the gap between states? I don't think so. I don't think Hunmu will either. Ning Ke said 3 sentences in a row. His expression was calm and his tone was firm. After he finished, he saw that his senior brothers did not say anything else. He turned around and walked out of the military station. Looking at his back, Song Qian and the others did not say anything. They only shook their heads after he left the military station. Beigong Weiyang looked at the crowd and said in a heavy tone, "Youngest brother, was strange today. In the past, he always did what he wanted to do first. He never talked so much like he did today." Song Qian thought for a while and said, "Youngest brother was explaining to us and to himself. It seems that he does not have much confidence in facing Hengmu." Hearing this, the military station became even quieter. No one spoke for a long time. Wang Jinglu followed Ning Ke out of the barracks and walked toward the central military tent. After walking for about half a mile, he could not help but ask, "Are you not confident?" His thoughts were similar to the senior brothers of the academy in the military station. If Ning Ke really had the confidence to defeat Hengmu, he would not have to explain so much. Perhaps it was not an explanation, but there must be something. Ning Ke was a little surprised. He stopped and turned around to ask, "What confidence?" Wang Jinglu was silent for a while and said, "The confidence to defeat Hengmu." Ning Ke raised his eyebrows slightly and thought for a while before he understood what Wang Jinglu meant. He smiled helplessly and said, "Those words were for the senior brothers. I don't want them to do those stupid things with you." Wang Jinglu said, "Sacrifice does not mean stupidity." Ning Ke said, "Unnecessary sacrifice is stupidity." Wang Jinglu asked, "Then how are you going to defeat Hengmu?" Ning Ke said, "If I kill him, I will naturally defeat him." This was still nonsense. Just like how he answered how to defeat Hengmu in the military station, it was almost the same boring but always correct logic. This did not convince Wang Jinglu. He stared at Ning Ke's eyes and asked persistently, "How do I kill him?" Ning Ke smiled and asked, "Do you want to know?" Wang Jinglu nodded and looked very determined. Ning Ke turned around and walked toward the central military tent of the Southern Army. His words echoed in the verdant canyon, "When I kill him, you will know how to kill him." Song Qian and the other disciples of the academy and Wang Jinglu insisted. The commanders of the Southern Army and the Yulin Royal Guards also insisted that the best way to defeat Hengmu was to make a corresponding sacrifice and use the primordial 13 arrows. However, Ning Ke still opposed it. When others opposed his opinion, he would continue to oppose it. He was the youngest brother of the academy. According to the sequence, he was not very high. However, he was the de facto leader of the academy. As for the Tang Empire, they all followed his lead. Therefore, his insistence was very powerful. No matter what Song Qian and the other Tang generals thought, they still had to follow his orders. The next morning, the Tang army left the verdant canyon in the south and came to the fertile field in the north of Qinghe County. This was the first time that the Tang army set foot on this land since the rebellion of the warlords in Qinghe County. The morning light was beautiful and the morning breeze was pleasant. The military flag danced in the wind and looked fresh in the light. The news of the fall of the Golden Tribe royal court was told by Ning Ke to the generals. Coupled with his deliberate action, the news quickly spread among the army. The strong enemy in the north that had been entrenched for many years suddenly became a mirage. The morale of the Tang army was greatly boosted. Looking at the former territory, they only felt magnificent. Even the generals and cultivators who were worried about Hengmu felt refreshed at this moment. It was not because they saw the legendary scenery, but because they came to this beautiful scenery. The Tangs would eventually take back what belonged to them. Walking out of the verdant canyon was the first step in this process. All they needed to do was to be more stable. The 40,000 cavalrymen of the Southern Battlefront Army and the Yulin Royal Guards, together with a larger number of experienced infantry, formed a mighty army. They swarmed out of the verdant canyon and spread across the fields toward the south. They did not encounter any strong resistance along the way. The armed forces of the warlords hiding in the towns and villages melted like ice under the sun in front of the Tang army. They could not even slow down the Tang armies southward, let alone stop them. The rumored beautiful bridges, rivers, and gardens in spring appeared in front of the 100,000 Tang soldiers. They enjoyed it silently and calmly, but soon they could no longer maintain this mood. There were dead people everywhere. Between the bridges and the gardens in spring, there were hanged people everywhere. At least thousands of bodies were hanging on the treetops, on the bridges, and at the gates of the gardens. Some of the bodies were already rotten, while some were still glaring with anger. The once quiet and beautiful homes in the south of the Tang Empire seemed to have become a huge graveyard. From the verdant canyon to the city of Yangzhou, there were such miserable scenes everywhere. The Tang army could no longer be happy as they broke through the cities and towns one after another. Their expressions were extremely solemn and their footsteps became more and more hurried. They knew very well that the dead hanging in Qinghe County must be their compatriots. Yes, Qinghe County had betrayed the Tang Empire a few years ago, but there were still many people living here who cherished Chang'an, especially those young people. As long as they cherished the Tang Empire, they were Tangs and compatriots. The Tang army marched silently and hurried south. They did not release the hanged dead, nor did they pay more attention to them. There was no mourning ceremony, because they knew that they had to reach the city of Yangzhou as soon as possible and drive the West Hill Divine Palace and the South Jin Kingdom out of this territory. Only then could they truly comfort the dead. It was another early morning. The Tang army appeared at the foot of the city of Yangzhou. Countless military flags fluttered in the morning wind. The warhorses neighed softly and the blades were unsheathed. A murderous aura rushed toward the ancient city. The city of Yangzhou was in chaos. When the Tang army left the verdant canyon, the warlords and bigwigs of the West Hill Divine Palace had received the news. But no one had expected that the Tang army would come so quickly. Yangzhou was a big city. Even compared to the entire Tang Empire, it could be ranked in the top 5. It was extremely difficult to conquer. The Tang army did not take advantage of the momentum to attack the city. The generals of the Southern Army and the Yulin Royal Guards forcibly controlled the emotions of the soldiers. They began to set up camp on a large gentle slope 10 miles north of the city. For a moment, the sound of pounding earth could be heard everywhere. A Tang soldier was smashing a wooden pile. Hearing the sound coming from afar, he looked up and saw that the city gate of Yangzhou was slowly opening. A dense mass of cavalry surged out like a tide. My mood is terrible. It was caused by ice dregs of the butterfly forest and other B** cheese. I might stop writing for a day tomorrow. Think about it. The day after tomorrow I will recover, and the day after tomorrow I will start to explode. Damn, I want to defeat these B** cheese. Chapter 1102. Yesterday, I mentioned that I might have to take a day off to think about it. That's right, there was no update today. Due to his health, he hadn't written much in the past half a year. After he resumed updating, his monthly votes had become sticky and unrefreshing. It was because he was embarrassed and felt that it wasn't appropriate to ask for votes as soon as he updated. But today was great, there was no update today. Finally, I got the chance. I strongly, seriously, and sincerely call for everyone to vote for Shogun. There weren't many chances to vote for the Nighthawk. Time waits for no man. Once lost, never come again. Tonight, we need everyone's monthly tickets. Everyone needs to vote for General Knight 2. Let us be one. Monthly votes. Thank you. You're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.